a 2D. I welcome you all to the 2-day online training course on inclusive science, technology, and innovation policy for the OIC member states. We are very grateful for all your time and for attending this important training course. This training course is an effort of Comstech towards building capacity of the member states and designing inclusive science technology policies. We will begin our technical session today with our first speaker, Mr. Umar Shiraz. Mr. Umar Shiraz is Innovation Policy Analyst. He's based in Pakistan. He likes to identify himself as a social change researcher, cross-disciplinary collaborator, and foresight practitioner. He brings academic and professional experience in the arena of innovation and future thinking together. He has applied and taught research, strategic foresight, and scenario planning for about 12 years. With this, I would request our first speaker, Mr. Umar Shiraz, for his presentation and talk today. Over to you, Umar Shiraz sir.
Thank you very much. I would like to first of all thank the Comstech administration for giving me this opportunity. And I'm very thankful to my mentor and my teacher, Dr. STI, who's sitting with me. She's the one who introduced me to the foresight and innovation. And it's for the past 12 years, it's been a beautiful collaboration with her, and I've learned a lot from her. And today I will be sharing some of my insights with you, inshallah. So let's begin. Let's share my screen. All right. So for the next 1 hour, we'll be talking about foresight and how we can use it for inclusive policy making in the OIC. So I'll be talking a lot about foresight, but this is an interactive session in which I'll be interacting with the audience with you. And I would like to hear your views and your perceptions as well. So let's start with asking you a question, the audience. Why do we need to think about the future? Anybody? We have the chat function down here. So let's listen to some views from you, hear some views from you. Why do we need to think about the future? Okay. And because we are in Zoom now, it takes about 15 to 20 seconds for people to respond and come up with some messages. So let's listen to what people have to say. Okay. Why do we need to think about the future? Anybody? Okay. Is the voice clear now, Ms. Fazima? Can you hear me now? Is it okay?
Yes, Umar Sahab, I can hear you. But I would, there are participants who are requesting that you probably need to bring your microphone near to you.
Oh, okay.
Is it better now? Is it better now?
Okay. Yes.
Sure. Please, you can write in the chat.
Yeah, so Umar Sahab, we have one participant, Mr. Hazrat Hussain. He would like to say something regarding it. I would request our host at ICCBS to make Hazrat Hussain the co-host so that he can speak and we can listen to him.
For this one, yes, okay. But after this, I would like to put your thoughts in the chat function.
Chat function.
Yeah, please.
Okay.
Okay. Why do we need to think about the future? We should not think about the future. We should just stay stuck in the present. Please, all right? Go ahead. Mr. Hazrat Hussain, are you? Okay. I'd like to move ahead because I've not received any suggestion in the chat yet. Yeah, please, Mr. Hazrat Hussain, yeah, please go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead, speak. Okay, I think we'll go ahead and we can have this interactive session a bit later, so that we can finish this in 1 hour. So okay. So Neopark has said that it gives us a direction, and therefore we can plan our resources, and that includes time. So beautiful way to actually start this interactive session. That yes, we need some sort of a direction in terms of the future, and we need to plan our resources because resources are always going to be limited. And we need to plan our resources appropriately, and time as well, because time is also limited. We only have some limited resources, so that's a very good way to actually start this. There are many reasons why you should think about the future. For example, what we are reaping today is what our ancestors sowed yesterday. Okay? The trees which they planted yesterday, today we eat the fruit from them. Likewise, our kids, we are the ancestors of tomorrow. What we will do today will be what our children and their grandchildren, they will reap those fruits tomorrow. So it's very important that we today do such actions which do not cause disruption tomorrow, and which create opportunities for them for growth, for sustainable growth tomorrow, and they do not become problematic for them tomorrow, right? So many reasons for thinking about future, and I like to use the analogy of being a captain of a ship. So imagine that you are the captain of a ship who's going to go out on a voyage. So let's say you're going from Karachi to New York, okay? Now in front of you is the sea, and you're thinking, all right, I'm going to go on this voyage. What should I plan? What should I do? Because you have to do whatever you have to do before you set out to sail. You can't do that during sailing. So yes, you need to think beforehand. What sort of weather might there be? Should I go by this route or should I change my route? Will there be pirates on the way? So should I hire some mercenaries or maybe put in some guns? Okay. So thinking beforehand. Okay. So that is what the essence of foresight is, that before we make any plan, we make any policy, any strategy, we think beforehand what are going to be the implications of that particular policy, and think beforehand about it. So this is the essence of foresight. That's why I like about it. When we talk about foresight for policy making, foresight is used by governments throughout the world, and it can support government policy making by better anticipation. You try to identify what are going to be some new opportunities, some new disruptions, some new challenges which could emerge in the future. And I'll be talking about some of those things in the presentation later. It's also about creating some sort of innovation in policy. That some policies, they also have their cycles. After some time, you need to think about new ways, new technologies, new challenges with new policies, and come up with some sort of an innovation in the policy. How do we best tackle the new opportunities, the new challenges? You need to innovate in your policy making. So, for example, for the past 1.5 years, we have come up with a new challenge, with an unprecedented challenge of something called COVID-19. I hope you have heard about it. I don't think anybody amongst us would be not affected by it. So you need some sort of a policy innovation because it's an unprecedented situation. You need to have some sort of innovation in your policy making so you can address those opportunities and challenges. And finally, you need to future-proof your, how do we stress test existing or proposed strategies? Because you can come up with any idea, any strategy, but you still need to future-proof it. Is this actually a good policy? So to some sort of wind tunneling process for that, how do I think that this is actually, how do I come up with this decision that this is actually a good policy and it's going to give the results that I intend to have when I pass on this policy? For that also we need some sort of foresight mechanism. Okay. Okay, so what is the problem? I mean, if this was all so easy and almost all of us think about the future in some way. So for example, in the morning today in Pakistan, in Islamabad where I'm living, it was raining. So I took my umbrella with me. So maybe wherever I go, I might have a problem, I might get wet. So I need to put my umbrella with me, okay? But this is in a very small horizon. Just for today, if it might rain today within the next few hours, I might be able to use that umbrella. Problem is using it for a longer horizon. So when we talk about foresight, we're talking about at least 10 years or 15 years down the line, so that we can plan for a longer horizon. And this is actually the problem. Just let me take out the highlighter. This is how we usually think about the future. We think that the future is going to be linear and sequential, and it will always be in a straight line. But most of us have, our Michelle and this who are in this webinar have been through situations where you're in the right place at the right time, wrong place at the wrong time. Something is going to come up which is going to disrupt your plans, your strategies. So if we just look at the last 30 years, just last 30 years, we have so many disruptions which have happened, so many geopolitical disruptions, so many technological disruptions, so many natural disruptions, which have altered our plans. So last 30 years, we can talk about in the fall of the Soviet Union. We have had a look at the rise and the fall of the Taliban, the 9/11 incident. We've had natural disasters like we had volcanoes which disrupted airplanes throughout in many parts of the world. We had viruses like Ebola, SARS, swine flu, and now COVID, which have disrupted a lot of our plans. But we always think that the future is going to be linear, it's going to be in a straight line, and it's going to be sequential, a series of events. Unfortunately, that's not how time works. And that is why there's a need to look at alternative scenarios. What other scenarios could happen which could disrupt my plans? Or if such a disruption does happen, how do I prepare myself for that particular change? Okay, here I would like to add a thing about, I hear a lot of people saying about trends, that, trends analysis, I think it is important, but I think it's also very important to use in our lingo something called emerging issues, because trends in themselves are problematic, because any sort of trend in the world is essentially data which is a reflection of the past. So whether it is a fashion trend, whether it is a policy trend, I mean, even look when kids come to us and they ask us, what profession should we go in? So the first thing which usually many of us will tell him is that, what is the trend nowadays? Is it telecom? Is it IT? Is it biosciences or AI? We look at the current trend. And many of those poor fellows, they get enrolled in such courses. By the time they get out after 4 years, that trend is over. They're moving into a new trend. Just to give you an idea, just to give an example. Just hang on a second. I would like to change my pointer. Color, yeah. Take the example. A lot of us, we when there is Eid al-Azha, we buy an animal. Okay, so that animal must be thinking, I'm having the best time in the world, because all the trends are going upstream. It's like this, like every day we give it a bath, every day we give it the best food, something innovative every day, maybe put in some henna on it. Lots of innovations happening every day, and the animal will be thinking, wow, I'm in ninth heaven, it's cloud nine, wonderful, life is so good. And then day comes in. Then those same hands which are giving food, they'll come with a meat cleaver and they'll cut off that animal, and all of a sudden, those trends will finish all of a sudden on Eid. It's very similar for trends as well. And this is the problem with a lot of economic data, with a lot of data which goes into extrapolating the past into the future. The problem is that none of us knows what is going to happen in the future, what sort of disruptions are, unless we account for them as well. It will not account for wild cards, it will not account for unpredictable events. Let me just give you an example. A few days ago, I was looking at some data by Singapore Airlines. They gave some presentation about what was happening and how they are living according to the new normal. So they gave this presentation. It was very similar like this. There was a trend chart in which they were doing so well and their sales was going up and all. But then all of a sudden, COVID-19 happened. Okay, and then they had this big disruption. And now they're trying to recover in tourism and have some sustainable tourism. So they're coming up with some different strategies. But if we're just looking at that particular trend and extrapolating it, because of that, strategies that become problematic. They become misleading or wrong, and that can be very disastrous. I'll share another slide with you later about how they're trying to, how this could be disastrous. So please do keep this if this is one slide which you can take with you. The trend, just looking at people who just look at current trends, they will always be in trouble later on. Right? Okay, this is the anatomy of almost any issue in the world. Any issue in the world. So this is what happened. Let me change my pen. Use a laser. Right? This is what happens. Okay. This is where any issue starts. Any issue in the world, when it's very small, when you're having some, it's at a very small scale. But what you see over here, then it gets discovered by universities and researchers, and the media shows and it shows that shock factor. What is happening? Popular media jumps in and there's a public outcry. You see, what is so ironic of all of this is where the government starts taking action. You see, it is too late by then. A lot of resources have gone to waste. A lot of time has gone away. What if we could link this with this right here? And this is the essence of foresight. So if this is one slide you can take home with you, and you can take this particular slide, I will go home a very happy person that I've done my job for which I was called for this presentation today. This is very important. If you can do something at this stage, the emerging sci-fi stage, you must have done, then you have done a great job. And let me, because this, our theme is inclusive foresight and inclusive policy making. Let me give you an example from Pakistan. We now face a situation in Pakistan where about 85,000 female doctors are at home. They are not practicing, they're in the medical field. And it's because of different social cultural issues. There is brain drain as well. But we are at this stage now, 85,000 doctors at home. And imagine that we are in a pandemic and those doctors are not serving. So there's the trophy wife phenomena, different phenomena that are happening. Just a second, please, there's an issue with the mic. Is the mic all right now, Ji? Is it better? Is the sound quality okay?
Excellent, Umar Sab. I think we're good to go.
Okay, wonderful. All right, so we were having this talk over here that right now we are faced with this dilemma. Achha, the really ironic thing is that many of us were actually realizing this issue when this was becoming an emerging issue 15 to 20 years ago. So many of us would have noticed 20 years ago at this stage that, there is somebody in our neighborhood who got married and who's not practicing now. Or maybe there is a cousin or an aunt or anybody in our family who has become a doctor and she's been, she's got married and she's not, practicing her in the field of medicine. So this was actually, and how much, and you realize how much resources are spent on each doctor. How much time is spent? I mean, female doctors are about 65 to 70% of our, of our students in the medical field.
Yeah.
So look at the amount of resources which go there. Unfortunately, if it doesn't bear fruit, that is a big national loss, and which we are doing, which we're facing now. So this is actually a very good time. This place over here is actually a great time to actually take action. But for that, we need to have some sort of foresight. We need to have that eye, that analytical. We need to look in an analytical way to actually come up with the, such emerging issues. I'm going to make, just a second, just to show you why these things are so problematic. I'm going to share a little video with you. Hang on. Okay. All right. Can you see this video, everybody? Can you? Okay. Can you see this video? All right. Okay, this is a small activity which I just want to do with you. This will show you why it's problematic. Okay. What I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a small video in which the players are passing the basketball to each other. You have to count how many times the player wearing white passed the basketball. All right. So that's the instruction. I'm going to play a small video and just have a look at it. Okay. So here we go. Okay.
The players wearing white pass the basketball. passes did you count?
Okay, so this is your question. So you can put in the chat, how many passes did you count? Anybody? Anybody count? Waiting for your replies. So somebody says 6, okay. Anybody? I'll take 2 or 3 responses. So some says 10. All right. Okay. Okay. Now this is great. Thank you for all those who have replied. This is great. This is the correct answer. But hang on a second. What exactly did we miss in all of this? All right.
It's 15 passes.
How many of you saw
But did you
the
see-
gorilla? Did you? How many of you saw the gorilla? So here's a rewind. So all this time there was actually a gorilla in the video, all right? Okay, so just wanted to share that with you. Okay, hang on a second. Oh, you did, okay, that's great, G, that's great. Perhaps you had a look at this before. Okay, let me share my PowerPoint again. And this actually is the problem. This video, by the way, it was shared with us about 2 years ago. I went to the Asia Pacific Futures Network, and the transportation minister from Singapore was there as a keynote speaker. And he shared this video with us, and his key insight from this was that we are surrounded by so much information and misinformation, and we're bombarded with so much that many times we just lose that, such a big thing is distraction is going to happen, such a big disruption is going to happen, such a big opportunity space is passing right by, and we do not take notice. Okay, this was his key insight from it. Okay, so this is why this is problematic. That's why many people miss out on this. I mean, that's why many people miss out on this part, that even while the disruption is happening, they miss out on this because they are bombarded by information, those distractions, they are so distracted by them, they lose out on them.
Media.
And madam, she's just saying social media. I'll tell you my own. I had a Facebook account. I had to stop it. Too much time being wasted, bombarded with so much information. I just now have a WhatsApp account.
Yeah.
Even on WhatsApp, I'm bombarded with so much information that what I've read 10 minutes ago, I will forget it within 10 minutes. So much other information and misinformation and jokes and what all not coming in. That's why it's very, very important that you have those dedicated people, dedicated organizations, and ourselves as well. All of us in itself, as I said, we are future looking, all of us by instinct, but it's very important to cancel all that noise and see ahead what disruptions are coming in, what sort of gorillas are stepped in, and we need to have a look at them. All right. Now, this is the same graph, but this is in terms of media coverage and public awareness. This is what happens at this stage. If you're going to look for some really nice ideas and some nice ridiculous ideas, usually these ideas are going to be very ridiculous. I mean, think of this. If 3 years ago I was giving this presentation, I tell you, what, there is a probability that we're going to have a pandemic, and it's going to disrupt the whole world. Most probably we just be looking at me saying, what, yeah, you need to consult a psychiatrist. Seriously, you need to consult. But now we are living that disruption. All of us are living that disruption now. The really smart people, they're using even this as an opportunity. They're still using this as an opportunity space. But think of it this way over here, that this was an idea which, in terms of science fiction, artistic works, maybe even a doctoral dissertation, because people are searching on it. By the time it gets to what's called popular awareness and government awareness, it already is too late. It has already peaked, the issue has already peaked, and you've already lost a lot of time. This is how usually policy making and strategizing and action takes place generally in the developing world. Okay, and so that's why there is a need to look at, use foresight. And I was talking to you about that gentleman from Singapore, and within that APFN, there was another gentleman who was an epidemiologist. And he was talking about why an epidemic could be so problematic. I mean, I was looking at that this particular slide 2 years ago, and I was like, wow, if such an epidemic happens, this is going to be destructive, because you look at the way we are connected in the world. This slide also shows us that we live in an interconnected world. We are not divorced from the rest of the world. We don't live, even if you live on an island, you're still in some way connected to the rest of the world. And that's why it's very important to be on the out, always be looking out for some sort of disruptions and in these, and probably chances of innovations. Okay, so I've talked a lot. I've been talking for the past 30 minutes. Now it's time for you to, just give me some idea. When this thing happened, when 2021 started, I gave a talk, and one of the questions which I asked them was that why is there so much optimism now? People are saying 2021 is going to be better than 2022. And my thing, which I was asking that time, was that what is the evidence on base of which we are looking at so much optimism? If you look at 21, there have been such a lot of disruptions in 2021. So here is a question for you. If you had this foresight, if you could go back in time, and if you could rewind and just think about this, what were some events or data which might have helped you prepare for 2021? It is past now. We are already moving towards the last quarter of 2021. So what are some events or data which might have helped you prepare for 2021? Anybody? Anybody would like to? It's a little tricky question. I realize that, but anybody? What events or data might have helped you prepare for 2021? If you go back, somehow you could go back in a time machine, make 2021 a bit correct. What would you have done? What sort of events might have helped you? Anybody? This is a little tricky. I realize foresight is sometimes can be a little overwhelming because that's not the way usually we think about, strategy and all. Some past changes and sector studies trends. Okay, that's a good way to start. Some past changes and some sector studies trends. Yes, that's a good way to actually start. That we look at each sector and say what are some trends over there. Again, I would like to suggest to you, you use trends a lot. Try now using the term emerging issues. Emerging issues. We always look at trends. Okay, what else? What will possibly likely combination of the trends emerging into? Okay, so that is beautiful. So what sort of combination of the past trends they could support some sort of a disruption? So that's also a great idea. Okay, some great ideas. Online activities are common now, so that is great. That was an insight. Again, now online activities now we are at this stage over here. It's already over here. We are living it now. So there is no emerging issue here at all. We are living it right now. Okay. Okay, what else? How do you reduce these disruptions and what about fantasies of the future? New emerging domains to look on. So yes, we can also look into new emerging domains as well. Okay, so that's a great idea. I mean, you look at what has happened in 2021, it has been, there have been lots of waves of COVID which have come. There's been a lot of disruption, lots of joblessness, lots of hopelessness. But still, people have continued to, innovate. That's a very good comment which has just been put in the chat, that we look at new sectors and new ways to look at, particular domains. So, for example, tourism is one area which has been tremendously hit by, by COVID. But now people are looking at, how do we make tourism more sustainable? Should we go to new areas? Should we create some sort of virtual, tourism things? I mean, they have to innovate, because if they do not innovate and they do not look forward, they're going to go the way of the dinosaur. They're going to wipe out. So those things are very important. So, okay, what else? Okay, there's also the problem of our religious belief. Yes, that gives a lot of hope. As a religious belief, that is very important. Yes, when we are in such, places, when we get stuck, in worst case scenarios, yes, belief, if you have belief, a good belief system, yes, that is also a source of a lot of help. Anything else? Okay. Vaccination, yes, that was one big disruption and one big thing which was a cause for a lot of hope. I'm sorry, not a disruption, but a big hope that vaccinations, thank you very much for bringing that to mind, bringing that out. That was a big hope. At least now we have hope. And what we see around the world is that those countries which are vaccinated well, they are now opening up their stadiums. Yeah. They're opening up their shops. They're having a great time. They've gone through the worst of it now. The ones which have not accepted it, they've gone through fake news and are resisting. They're having issues. All right. So thank you for bringing that. Okay. I'm going to, because time is always going to be against me and I would like to do one activity. Okay, here's another question. We have so many learned people in our webinar. Let's hear from you in terms of, let's say you are at this stage, okay? You are at this stage. Let's say we're at this stage. What are one or two issues or emerging trends that you feel urgency about, which you think really need to be addressed right now? Okay, let me give you an example. One big issue which many people are talking about right now, and COVID has accelerated that, exacerbated that issue right now, is what's called intergenerational fairness. This actually means is that, you know, we have an old population, we have a very young population. Both of these populations are usually not involved in our decision making. Okay, we need to have some sort of a balance that, you know, the world which are about to create are for the really young people. Yeah, what sort of a world are we, you know, leaving behind for them? So should they also have some say? What sort of world should we create for them? Plus the people who are already, you know, past the retiring age, that aging population. How do we balance those two? That is a big issue, and COVID has become an epidemic of inequality because both these sectors have been very badly hit because of it. All right. So tell me, what are one or two issues or trends that you feel urgency about right now? Any ideas which come to your mind? You can put in the chat. Anything which you think are really urgent and which you think we should do something about it right now. Otherwise, this might become a disruption, or it could be an opportunity space as well. I'm sorry, I keep talking about disruptions because that is the human mind. We are quickly attracted to disruption. Okay, so let's hear what we have in the chat. Okay, going digital individually, cybersecurity. Good ideas, some great ideas. Digital data protection, wonderful. Cybersecurity is perhaps going to be the biggest issue from now on, because as people go towards, you know, being more online, even we are having this conversation online. 2 or 3 years before, that might not have been a new normal, but if this is going to be the new normal, cybersecurity is going to be a big issue. The digital data protection, market stability, blockchain, artificial, yes, these are issues which you really need to look at. Online education, beautiful idea. Thank you for sharing that. Online businesses, because we have serious issues of connectivity. Again, as I said, COVID has emerged as a pandemic of inequality.
Yeah.
So those sectors, those communities which did not have proper access to electricity or proper access to the internet, they have been most effective. And this seems to keep going on. Yeah, even people who don't have computers also, their prices also got up. And isolated efforts to tackle COVID spread. Thank you very much. So there are some great ideas which you have come on. And this is the beauty of, you know, having these brainstorming sessions where, you know, you get the collective, you know, thoughts from people. Okay, let's move ahead. Okay, up till now we've talked about issues or trends or emerging issues and all. I want some sources. Where do you get these sources? Where do you look at? Are you going to look at a newspaper, some blog site? Where do you think would be some good sources for some emerging issues and signals which are relevant to inclusive policy making? Where would those be? Online children education. Okay. So for example, for myself, what I see is that I look at some of the policies which are actually happening already in the developed world. More sooner or later, you will have to also adopt some of those using your own context. But that is actually a good place that, you know, those guys are also doing this in the developed world. It could be in any sector or any domain. What are some of those things which I can actually also emulate? I would use this word very, we shouldn't just copy paste, but we should look at all context also. But those could be a very good source of emerging issues, some policy journals as well. But you can also tell me what could be some sources of emerging issues and signals which are relevant to inclusive policy making. Anybody else? Again, as I said, these are a little tricky questions. Okay, by the way, Acha, online children education, this was in the question before, but that is one thing which I have seen with kids now, and I have my own kids and I've been with them for the past 1.5 years at home. I'm amazed that the way they look at resources, the way children, they look at the world, it is really amazing. I find kids as a wonderful, way of looking at emerging issues because they are born with the internet tied to them.
Yeah.
They are so tech savvy. They know how to use Google. They know how to use our phones much better than we do. They are an amazing source. So some time ago, I was looking at some activity which was done by people in the Netherlands where they were designing some places. So they brought in some kids as well. So the kids then told them, are you designing this for us? If you're designing for us, where is the place for the cycles? Where is the, where the swings? Why are the swings located near the gates? They should be here. They should be, they brought in the kids and the kids told them, if you're designing this for us, at least please sometimes ask us also. And they came up with some great ideas. Okay. Remember what all we're thinking about the future. Doesn't matter which subject we're looking at, which theme you're looking at. We are designing for our kids. They're the people who will inherit the future we leave for them. So they are also a very good source of emerging issues. All right, let's see what we got in the chat. Okay. First mover, that's great as well. First mover innovative companies. That's a great idea. Thank you for sending that, Ms. Zainab. That those first mover innovative companies, they are a great source of emerging issues. Okay, there are some questions as well. We'll address them a little later. And finally, now this is, all of what we have said above is, brainstorming with us. But at the end of the day, all which really matters is, are we actually doing something about these issues as well or not? So one question which you have to ask yourself is, who is looking at these issues intentionally in my company, in my sector? Is there anybody who's looking at that? Or is it like just we having this conversation and we have this conversation, we'll just finish and we'll do nothing about it. So is there somebody in your organization or sector who's intentionally attending to these issues? That is a question I leave you with, and I will not ask this because some people are from organizations, some are there solo, but just think about this question. Is there someone in your organization or sector who is looking at these issues and what to do about them? All right. So this was about my, talk. And since this talk is about inclusive policy making, we're going to do some, I'm going to share a tool with you, which is very simple and you can take home with you and use it in your work as well. And that is the issue of ageism, of aging, what I always see is that, I've been involved in this work for the past 14 years in the world of innovation. I see some work being done for female empowerment, something about kids. We look at entrepreneurship, different topics which we look at. But one area which I have not seen much work being done is the issue of aging. And we're having a very big aging population, people who are getting older in the OIC. And this was just a report which came out from the World Health Organization. It has serious and wide-ranging consequences for people's health and well-being. I also had parents who died 2 years ago in a very old age. Again, the question always for me as a son was that, how do I put them, what sort of resources do I have that, they can have a fruitful final few years of their life? That was always a big question for me. How do I make their lives productive? These are people with a lot of skills. These are people who have seen life. They have a lot of experience. They are masters in, so the accumulated knowledge is there. But then how do we use that? Unfortunately, this is something which is not being looked into. So this is one area which I would like to, discuss, and, perhaps you can do some work on this together. Which thing in the chat? Okay. So I'm going to use a very simple futures tool, which is called the futures triangle. And all of us are going to do it together. I'm going to use your, the collaborative intelligence of this whole group, all people who are in this webinar. It's a very simple tool, essentially. What we do is, this is where we want to go in the future. All right, hang on a second. Let me. Okay, this is where we want to go in the future. Okay, this is what you envision. This is where you want to go. But for any issue, for any theme in the world, there are always going to be two opposite forces. One is what's called the weight of history, which is going to pull you down. Okay. The other is what's called the push of the present, which is going to support you in your mission, in your vision, is going to support you. both these, I mean, this is a great mapping tool for all of us, and you can take this home with you, use it in your own work as well. Very, very simple tool. And let me just elaborate that a bit further. When I talk about pull of the future, it's about what is it that you want at the end of the day? What is your compelling image of the future? So for example, those of you who are in Pakistan, they know about this concept of Imran Khan called Riyasat-e-Madina, okay? Now that is his compelling image of the future. This is where he wants us to go, okay? So that is the pull of the future. This is where I want to go. Is there anything else? So maybe there is some sort of global effort going on, which is pulling you towards that future. So we hear about globalization. There was the Me Too, thing which happened. There was the Black Lives Matter, that whole thing which happened. So lots of things which are compelling us to move towards the future. Or there could be some sort of competing images, contrasting images. So I want something else. My colleague wants something else. Those competing images as well. We just put that on the top. And this is where we want to go and see then in terms of tension, what sort of world emerges. The second thing which is helping you in this is what's called the push of the present. It could be some sort of new technology. It could be some new driver, some new trend, something which was not possible before, but is possible now because of new demographics, some new world order which has changed, some new thinking in the way the world is looking at. And we try to keep this quantifiable because at the end of the day, we just don't want this to become something which is, that's just fantasizing. We don't want to just fantasize. We want to evaluate it as well. So some sort of quantitative drivers are also need so that you can quantify that. Is this trend also pushing us towards what future I want? Okay. And finally, there's something called weight of the history. Something which holds you back. It is not allowing you, it's that barrier to change. It could be social, it could be cultural, it could again be in the way we are, the way we perceive, the world around us. So for example, in Pakistan and many parts of the OIC, the diabetes has become an epidemic. I mean, so many people have diabetes, but it is in our culture that we eat something sweet. That is part of our society. That is part of our culture. So that is a weight of history. We want a diabetes-free, OIC, but our, social society and culture, it is holding us back. It could be that somebody could be using elements of religion. It could be elements of, society, and it could be pulling you down. And I say this because, for example, Pakistan and Afghanistan, there are two countries now left in the world which are polio-free. Which have polio. The rest of the world, it has eradicated polio. Yeah. What is happening in our country is those elements who use the guise of religion, and they're not allowing us to become a polio-free Pakistan or polio-free Afghanistan. Yeah. So those are the barriers to change. You want change, but there is something called weight of history. Plus, there are the deep structures. It could be like the way we are structured, the way our bureaucracies are structured. So all these are great ideas. You want AI, you want, you want online education, all that is great. But if your bureaucracy is so bureaucratic and has such a lot of red tape, it will resist that change. So I remember walking into a ministry, which I will not name, and I was talking about, let's have this change. And the first thing was, will I have to learn how to use this software? I will have to do this. Why should I do that? Okay.
They don't want to learn.
So they don't want to learn. They want to resist that change. All right. So let me just give you this example. So for the past 1.5 years, we have become what's called an online society. We do a lot of work now online, but that has also brought what's called the digital rights and safety issues to the core. So this was some work which I did with the legal company was looking at digital rights and an NGO which is looking at them. Now this is what we want. We want safe use of social media. We want some sort of legislation for control and privacy, rights of access to be defended, copyrights. This is where we want to go. Okay. At the same time, there are going to be some weights and there are going to be some pushes. So in terms of weights, what we have is that there is generally an ignorance about digital issues. Many people don't realize that these even are issues at all. Then cybersecurity is generally, even our most educated people, they don't know much about cybersecurity. Plus, there is also this thing about the, that surveillance capitalism that we are facing now, that, we call it agencies, you want to call it, our big companies which are watching us all the time and using our data. So Facebook, Google and all, they're watching us all the time, okay? And they're using our data. Plus what we have now is that for perhaps the first time in history where we have very young users and where we have very old users. One of the great things which has happened in COVID is that even the oldest people who were very reluctant to use digital technology have now started to embrace digital technologies because they still need to communicate, they still need to shop, they still need to hang around with people. So they've started to adapt to technology, which is resulting in a lot of cybersecurity issues. All right. So this is what's called the weights, the barriers. All right. At the same time, there is something which is called pushes or the drivers. So COVID-19 itself has become the biggest push. I mean, I can't remember. I mean, some of these things you've been advocating for the past 15 years. I've been with Dr. Naeem for the past 10 years. She's been advocating about, these digital rights. She's been talking about, how we need to go online and have these businesses, entrepreneurship and all. COVID-19 has really pushed lots of these things to the fore. Now you can't think of an organization which does not have some sort of, online presence. Then there are shifting business practices. More people are now becoming freelance. There's easy access to information, and we're connected to a global world. So that is, and then there is a push to reduce our footprint as well. So that is a push, all right? So this is essentially your map of the future, okay? So these are the different issues and variables which you'll be looking at. Then it becomes very, very easy. What you have to do is, how do you minimize, hang on a second, let me use my pen. How do you minimize these weights? You need to minimize them, that's it. How do you need to improve your pushes? And you're well on your way, all right? So very simple tool which you can use in your work as well. So what I'm going to do is we're going to the last 10 minutes of our presentation. So let's try to do this together. And I also say this is very important because, I'm going to look at 2035 inclusive policymaking for ageism in 2035 or 2040. So I'm myself 44. 2040, I will be within that age cohort, which will be using this policy. And many of you who are in the audience will also be using this policy then in 2035, 2040. So think about, let's start with the top, that what do you think is what do you want over here? This is the future which you want. So what do you want over here? So let me start, hang on a second. Let me share my screen. So let's keep this interactive and let's do this. Janab. So what do I want over here? Okay, so what sort of a future? What is my image of the future? So I'll start with myself, all right? I'll give one idea how to start a new job. Let me say, starting a new job role after retirement, all right? Okay, so this is one thing I want. I mean, till age 60, I'm done enough with my being a futurist and doing policy innovation work. I want a new job, a new role after retirement. This is what I want, all right? But then definitely that'll have its weights, it'll have its drivers, it'll have its pushes as well. So let's look at some ideas from you, all right? What else do you want over here? What else would you like over here? Anybody? In the old time, it's used to be simultaneous. You ask people questions, they will answer immediately. The new normal now in Zoom is it takes about 20 seconds for people to, think about a question, to think about an answer, and then type it. 20 seconds is the new normal, okay? So think about some ideas. What do you want? So you're going to get retired in, let's say, in about 15, 20 years. What sort of a world do you want? I'm waiting for your answers in the chat. So what do you want over here? Or maybe by that time, nobody wants to retire. Everybody wants to continue.
I think nobody, they're all young. Hopefully they're all young people.
Yeah, actually there is this thing which is happening in a lot of parts of the world. They have realized the importance of people who retire. So in lots of countries, what they're doing now is they're saying, you retire when you want to retire. So that could actually be one future, which is actually happening in Japan and many countries, especially for academics and researchers.
Nordic.
Okay.
Nordic.
Okay. Consulting work. Okay, so you want to have some sort of consulting work. So a new role. Okay, let's say some sort of a consulting work.
Yeah,
So that could actually be so you've done a lot of work till, let's say, age 60. Now you want to help the world with this. So this is your new vision. This is what I want to do. I'll just take one more opinion. Any other? What else you want? What sort of a life you want? Okay. Anybody else? Actually, even in Pakistan, we had this, there was a law which they tried to implement that, make the age of retirement to 62 or 65, but that could not be passed because then the question was that what about the young people? Starting your own business and venture. Okay,
Yeah,
so I'm just going to, that's a,
yeah, very good. Yeah.
okay.
Starting your business. Yeah.
Okay, so all right. So this is our vision of the future. There could be many more ideas. I'm just, because this is demonstrative in nature. So yeah, all right, let's do this. That we want to start a new job or role after retirement. We could do some sort of consulting work because we have a lot of experience by that time, by 2035. Okay. And let me just put this over here as well. So it's 2040. All right. So for some reason it's 2040. Okay. Okay. Now, for any issue, any image of your future, there are going to be some weights. There are also going to be some pushes. So tell me, what are going to be some weights for this? Anybody? What's going to be a weight for this? Starting a new job, consulting work, starting your own business and venture. What do you think are going to be some weights or barriers for this? Anybody? Some of you gave these ideas. Social work for the benefit of the community. This is great as well. I'm going to put this over here as well.
Very good.
Okay, so what would be one weight? Financing problems, that is great. So we could have financing problems. Yes, that is going to be a big issue. Where do you get the finances? So you have your endowment fund, your, let's say, your provident fund with you, but yes, health conditions. Okay. Okay, I'm having a little issue. So we could have some health issues. Health issues, we could have family problems. Yes. Yes. Resources, funding, these are all great ideas. Society, even society, yes. Yes, society can be a big issue. The culture. Even the youth at that time, for example, right now, when we talk about sometimes about, extending the age of retirement people to 62 or 65. So a lot of young people will be saying like, what about us? They're taking our job. So again, this is not anything right or wrong about this, but as I said, this could be a barrier. We need to find some sort of a balance. And lack of business management skills. So, okay. So yeah. Okay. So great. These are some great ideas. Okay. We could have a lot more of them, but just for demonstrative purposes. So these are some of the weights and barriers which could come. You want to go this way, but these are some of the weights and barriers. All right. Now let's look at some of the pushes. What are some of those drivers which are actually pushing us? Some trends, some emerging issue, some sort of global, things which are coming up, which are actually supporting us in our mission. So let's think about this for a moment. What could be some pushes and drivers? Okay, great. Wonderful. So we might have technology which might be advanced at the time. We might have learned new technologies. Yes, that's true. Good. Mobility to distances. I'm sorry, I could not understand what that means. Mobility to distance. I'm sorry, I couldn't understand. Could you just elaborate a bit?
The mobility is less because I think it probably means better communication.
Okay. International trends. So yeah, so just like we have globalization, or we have female empowerment and disability and its empowerment, perhaps at that time, the thing might be, the new fad might at that be, you know,
online commercialization.
so aging empowerment, let's see. All right. And yes, throughout the world, there is this, you know, yes, we need to think about our aged population, how to empower them. Okay, what else? Okay, you can go farther, so you're limited by mobility. Okay, so that's a, you can't drive a car, okay, that's fine. Our companions and friends, links that we have made throughout our life. So yes, that's true. So your links, because you have your networks, because you have reached that age in time where 60 and you have all these networks, so you can actually use your networks to think about life after retirement and think about the aging population. Wonderful. Networking is there. The experience which I've gathered, so great, that's great. What else do you think is a push and a driver? Wonderful ideas, by the way. And that is the beauty of working with, you know, smart people in a group and brainstorming. Zara naam ho, to bahut zarkhiz hai ye matti. Lack of abilities, yes, that could actually be a weight. What else? What could be a, wow, another pandemic? Wow. Well, now that's, you know, and this is the beauty of foresight work, that we do not reject any idea because it could come in hand tomorrow. And actually, this idea is not very too far off as well, by the way, because yes, what we are seeing, especially in the futures community, what is being said now is that you see the frequency of zoonotic diseases and pandemics is actually increasing. So within the last 20 years, we've had SARS, Ebola, swine flu, you know, different viruses, and now COVID. And this is something which was expected to actually increase. So yes, so this is not a very radical idea, by the way. So great. Thank you very much for sharing that with us. And I'll just take this one last idea. Self-esteem, yes, yes, you want to. And actually, I would just say self-esteem, and plus, by that time, perhaps health could actually also be improved. Maybe you could have better technologies, opportunity to work with young a lot. So that's great. Wonderful. So great ideas. I'll just call it a stop over here because we have only a few more minutes because we need to finish. But you see, this is a very simple tool which I wanted to share with you in terms of thinking about the future. And I hope it will be beneficial for you. So this is where we want to go. That's where we want to go on the top. These are the weights and the barriers, which, you know, will be, you know, present, not, so it's then becomes very easy. You need to address these issues today, the financing issues, the health issues, culture, create a culture, the financing problems and all. You can, you know, address these issues today, make yourself a better life tomorrow. And then there could be many other issues which you could put over here. This was just something demonstrative. So thank you very much. I really appreciate all of you that, you know, you took your time and you gave me 1 hour of your life. And in terms of moving ahead, just a few things I would like to share over here. That I believe we need government organizations with the mandate of horizon scanning and scenario planning. They should have that mandate, okay? Again, the second thing is then we also need to have some sort of policy engagement and communication, all right, of these specialized organizations with policymakers, because just scanning is not enough. So we had this discussion, which is great. How do we get it to those people who actually are going to implement that change? So getting this thing to the policymakers, okay? Finally, we also need to inculcate the spirit of foresight. I mean, as I said, 10 years ago, when I came to comstech, I didn't know what foresight was. I was usually thinking, oh, this is going to be a course on forecasting. But then my life changed when I took this course and, I was sensitized to this. So we need to sensitize other civil society organizations, even higher education institutes. I know in many countries, foresight as a subject is still not taught. And I think after COVID, we need to realize this, that we need to change this, that we need to bring this in our courses as well. And finally, we also need to have some sort of capacity building of government employees, general public and policymakers through some sort of these public programs. They also need to build capacity in them as well. Otherwise, you're going to keep talking people about, trends. They'll keep talking about trends. They'll have nothing to know about what's an emerging issue. So that's why you need these capacity building courses as well. So that was it essentially from me. For anybody of you who is interested in, contacting me after this workshop, you feel free. You can find me on LinkedIn as well. I work at CompStats University. So this is my address, and you can contact me as well. And if you're interested in, doing such an activity in your organization, or if you're interested in, learning more about foresight, I'd be more than happy to share my thoughts. And this is my final slide, and I leave you with this thought. Again, it's all about the sort of world we leave for our kids. Okay, we make a wrong step today, our children will bear its brunt tomorrow. We do right things today, our children will be happy. Very, very simple. Right? With that, I'll call it a day. Thank you very much, and I open the forum for questions. Ms. Khazima, over to you, please. Thank you, madam.
Very good.
Okay, Ms. Khazima, over to you.
Thank you very much, Umar Saab. It was a very nice and very interactive presentation, I must say. The floor is open for question and answers. If our participants have some questions, they can post it in the chat box. Actually, I think your presentation was very interactive, so I think most of the people already have chipped in their input, and there probably is a lot of understanding. We can take your, if you allow, we can take your question and answers in the end as well, in the end of the program today, or maybe after the next speaker, because I don't see any questions in the chat box. Okay, yeah, so there was this one question that I can see now. What Mr. Hazrat Hussain is asking, what is the difference between foresight and forecast?
Foresight and, forecast is more than numerical. You put in more numbers, do some number crunching, try to come up with what might happen. Remember, foresight is not about predicting. We're not in the business of predicting the future. With foresight, it becomes a bit more, this will happen. So be prepared for that. That comes in more into where you have numerical modeling, where you have statistics. That's where forecasting comes in a bit. We are in the business of foresight, where we do have some sort of numerical models as well, but more is on qualitative and perception of people. Because as I showed in my diagram, the S curve which I showed you, many of those issues you might not even have data for that. So we are in that business. So that's why it's a bit different. Yeah. And the duration difference, yeah, we're looking at longer term futures and how those will affect today. So we're looking at 10 to 15 years down the line.
So we have another question. How to deal with a situation where an external...
Okay, ma'am, thank you. I'm looking at that. This is a very tricky question. And this is the nature of humanity. A few days ago, we were having this international conference, and one of the things which came up was, why can't we have a preferred future, a joint vision of a preferred future for the whole of humanity? And this is unfortunate. As I said, I made that futures triangle. Some things are in our psyche. Somebody has to become victorious. Somebody has to fail. This is the way we have structured our society. So that's a very great question. So perhaps we can imagine futures in which everybody wins. That's a big deal, but that is something we can think about. But right now, that's the paradigm right now. Unfortunately, that is the way it is. It's the weight of the past, unfortunately. Okay. Thank you very much. Ms. Khazima, should we call it a day now?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. Madam, would you like to say something?
Madam would like to say a few things.
Well, I feel very proud of Umar. He's delivered a very, very good, very excellent lecture, Umar, and congratulations. Now, in policy making also, we have to consult all the stakeholders, all the major stakeholders. And just as in foresight, Umar said, we are doing it for our children. And therefore, yesterday somebody asked, the children are very innovative, true. So it's important that we do foresight with them, with the children also, and ask them what kind of future would they like? Where would they like to, how would they like to see this world to be? And that's very, very important because we are doing it for them. So they are really a very big stakeholders. The second thing Umar said, you learn a lot digitally. And I must say, I did learn, I learned about policies. I'm basically I was trained as a chemist, organic chem. I have my PhD in organic chemistry from Sussex University, and I taught in Germany and in Australia. But I became interested in policies because when I see that if the policies make a difference in a nation, and because I believe in making a difference. And the third thing Omar said, life, and then you have to have a lifelong learning habit. That's very, very important. I retired in 2004. And I felt at that time that my life had just started. And so I joined Comstech. I was offered a job at Comstech. So I joined Comstech. And for 12 years, I worked here. And thereafter, I worked with UNESCO. And for UNESCO, in fact, I worked for 7 years. It's in between also. For 7 years, doing different projects. I participated, I was working with them as a consultant. So somebody said as a consultant. So I said, well, she's chosen my field. But it is, one should not think of ever retiring. And because this life should be a lifelong learning process. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Gia. Thank you very much for the audience for being with me for an hour, and look forward to the rest of the presentations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, madam. And thank you very much, Umar Saab. Again, very, very thankful to both of you for, organizing this event. And with your permission, madam, can I please request our next speaker for the lecture?
Yes, sure.
So our next speaker is...
I think, don't we have a break now, Ms. Fazim?
No, we don't have a break today in this program.
Okay.
So, our next speaker is Dr. Khalil Malik. Dr. Khalil Malik is a senior lecturer at Alliance Manchester Business School, the University of Manchester. Dr. Khalil lectures in the areas of innovation management and innovation policy at University of Manchester. He has also worked on various research projects in the areas of technology, innovation management, science and innovation policy, and evaluation of innovation policy. Dr. Malik has been the book review editor for the peer-reviewed journal, R&D Management from 2007 to 2021. He has over 80 publications, including journal articles, conference papers, book chapters, and various consulting reports. The title of his talk today is University and Industry Linkages, Challenges and Opportunities. And with this, let me first thank him for his time. And with this, we are open to your lecture, Professor Dr. Khalil Malik. Over to you.
Okay, thank you, Kazima. Good morning. Assalamu alaikum from Manchester, UK. It's our morning time. I know it's your afternoon time, so it's a pleasure to join the course. Thank you, Dr. Naeem, for inviting me. We have a long association, as you know, through Comstech and previously through PCSD. So I will share the screen and then upload my presentation. You give me a moment. Okay. Okay. So the topic for my presentation that I was invited to present is on university and industry linkages, and especially looking at the challenges and opportunities. I've got about 20 slides I'll go through. And if you have any questions, then by all means you can put them up in the chat, or probably better, we have a short time at the end of the presentation. So I'm based at the University of Manchester in the Business School. We're also affiliated to the Manchester Institute of Innovation Research, which is one of the world's largest centres of innovation research, focusing on policy, management, and a variety of other aspects. So this topic of university-industry linkages is quite well established, especially in the science, technology, policy literature. So I'm assuming many of you may already have quite a good knowledge about some of the issues that we're going to cover. So because I'm not aware of your background, so I'm making the assumption that you will have some knowledge, others that don't, then hopefully you can learn something from this session. So here is a list of the key issues that I want to cover today. So what firstly are the key motivations for universities and industrial firms wishing to pursue university industry collaborative initiatives? So what are the key drivers? Not all universities will be in a position to collaborate with firms. For example, some universities are mainly teaching focused. Some that have teaching and research will obviously be interested. Many of them will already be pursuing links with them. And not all firms will want to collaborate with universities. So it's only for those that need it, for those who are looking for opportunities to do that in the future, they will pursue those linkages. So I will provide a few typical examples. When we talk about university industry links, it actually covers quite a wide spectrum of activity, right from research collaboration through to engagement of students, through to other types of policy consultancy work from the university to industry, vice versa. So there's a wide spectrum of linkages that are available for universities and industries to link on. There have been a few academic studies, and I'll present some insights through those studies on the challenges and opportunities faced in setting up university industry collaboration. So some of my own research has actually had an interest focused on South Asia, and I'll present a few of our findings from some recent work in recent years on this topic as well within the presentation. And of course, we need to draw out for this type of course on STI policy. It's important that we draw out implications for policy and key stakeholders. So that's basically the plan for the session, and let's see how we go through that. So firstly, what is the nature of the know-how that the universities possess that might be useful for industry to interact with? Well, we have highly innovative, groundbreaking research in developing areas, invention and development in industrially established areas of science, technology, engineering. So some of you in the university system will be at the forefront of some of this groundbreaking research in your line of work. The universities provide an application of their knowledge that is underpinned by academic understanding for not only the sciences, but a wide variety of humanities subject areas. Some universities work closely with industry. And why is that? They have a mission to gain better understanding and provide research and support and education and training to meet industry needs. So for example, some university departments might actually be providing some bespoke courses for the needs of industry, some training courses, for example, some executive education type of training as offered by my school here at Manchester. And then universities also provide a wider contribution to society. This might be general economic well-being for a nation, for society more widely. It might be something specific. It may be developing some cure for a critical illness, some new drug discovery. In the news, as you've seen in the last year or so with the global pandemic, the university scientific community has played a very prominent role in helping to develop some of the vaccines to combat COVID, along with industry collaboration. Okay, so contribution of society is an important and growing mission for many universities. What has been the changing role of universities in recent years? Well, if we're looking at them to be encouraged to work more closely with industry, universities need to then work with industry on fast-paced real projects, because timing is sometimes a critical issue for industry. They require results today and not so much too far into the future. But what we must not forget is that universities still need to conduct our basic scientific research. Without the basic scientific research, we cannot move on to developing applied research. And of course, a very big mission for universities is to deliver excellence in teaching to our students. So with that, teaching and research workload might often end up being quite high for some academics, but this needs to be maintained for academic standing. As part of the university's changing role, in some universities, we are encouraged to provide more academic consultancy, helping academics to become more closely involved with the potential licensees in maybe some low-risk environments. Starting up a company might actually help to increase an academic status and peers. Now, this isn't the norm for most academics, but for those who are pursuing that, it is seen as important. For example, perhaps they've come up with an invention, a patent, and then the university will help them to license that patent to industry. An academic-led company, for example, a company could be born inside a university incubator, and then it is later spun off as a university spin-off company. So there needs to be a cultural shift and a change in the skill sets for the academic to successfully lead that company. So this is another way of thinking about university industry interaction, is that sometimes the interaction is started off within the university because the company is born in the university, and then the company grows off, starts to develop, starts to grow, but there's still a connection with the university. Okay, let me just have a look. We've already got some chats. Okay, so why should industry firms collaborate with universities is a question that we need to pose. Well, for the industry side, it allows you to tap in to sometimes scarce scientific expertise. So we could imagine not all industry firms, especially SMEs, may have their own in-house research and development unit or department. Okay, many of them will not have formal R&D. They will have maybe some new product development. So they will have a lack of scientific expertise and capabilities that push them to think about collaborating with universities. Industry can enhance scope and testing of some of its in-house corporate activities. So it may well be that it's come up with a particular new idea, and rather than testing that in-house, it's using some university center of excellence, equipment, expertise to share some of their ideas and to get a wider perspective on that testing. So that's a very practical scope or mission for some companies, why they would want to interact with the university. Then we have some industry firms who provide general scanning function, or they do scanning of the technology and science environment that they are embedded in. Sometimes in the literature, this is referred to as intelligence gathering. to improve their internal knowledge of the base of the firms. And this is especially important if firms want to take advantage of open innovation, where they are open to ideas from the outside, whether that's through research, whether that's through engagement, and bring those ideas into the firm, and then not only bring them in, but absorb those ideas and share them and utilize them. So much of that can be coordinated. So some companies will have specific teams, or maybe they will have individuals with the remit of gathering that intelligence. And that person or team may well be speaking or looking to gather intelligence from many universities. Okay. This partly fits actually with the last presentation you were having around foresight. Okay, if you look at this in the longer term, think of this as technology foresight inside of companies. Yeah. So their horizon scanning might not be 5, 7, 10 years. It might be for the next year or 2 years that they're looking at applying some particular knowledge, and they need to gather knowledge from the outside through intelligence gathering and bring that knowledge in to then help them understand their particular product or processes better to commercialize them and innovate in the market. Another motivator for industry, especially in research collaboration, is cost, sharing the risks and outputs. Okay? Now, that sharing of risks and outputs is important because research is very costly. It's very risky. Not all of your research projects in industry will lead to successful market applications. Okay? Some of that will go to waste. Others, you will have to pick up that knowledge at some point in the future if the project has failed. So there's a lot of experimentation that goes on in industry. Okay, so why not look at opportunities where you can share the risk and the outputs of your research with some university partners? And that cost implication could be shared across government incentives. So in some countries, there may be a national government policy or an initiative to allow firms and universities to participate in what is known as a research consortium. Okay? And what that allows is maybe some large firms, maybe some SME firms, not just one university, maybe a group of universities coming together as part of this larger initiative, perhaps partly incentivized by government funding. Okay, so this leads to co-publication of papers between industry and universities, although that may not be a major motive for many firms. So historically, where that was motive was in areas like chemistry in the past, biology, computer sciences. There is evidence of co-publication between university academics and industry researchers and staff, but much less so in recent years. Okay, so typical examples of university industry linkages, as I mentioned right at the beginning, there's quite a wide spectrum of activities that can be covered by this term university industry linkages. The most common, or one of the most common linkages, may be via short-term or medium-term contract research with an industry partner. Okay, so the industry partner wants a piece of research, small-scale research, doing under a contract. It might be a 6-month contract, it might be a 1-year contract, and they give that contract to a university research center to pursue that particular line of research. What's important with that is, from the university side, is what sort of impact is that research going to have? Is that research going to make a difference? So in some of these presentation slides, I'm going to leave with you a few YouTube clips, which you can then watch in your own time. So this particular clip highlights the importance for a university in Ireland as to what impact actually means with their research collaborations with industry, and you'll get some interesting insights into what impact means in terms of making a difference to economy, to society more widely. As I briefly mentioned before, creation of university spin-offs is a form of university industry linkage. In some countries, there may be policy measures that encourage the setting up of science parks, or you may call these technology parks. This facilitates links with the university departments or individual professors within those departments. So these science parks can act as an economic magnet for clustering new, so NTBFs is new, typically new technology-based firms, okay? So many of these firms will often be a tenant on the science park. So here, for example, near the University of Manchester, we have a science park, the Manchester Science Park, on the doorstep of the university. So that provides an opportunity for those firms that wish to have closer linkages, facilitated by the science park management team to help them link with a particular university department if they so wish to do. Another example of UI linkages is company-sponsored labs, laboratories on the university campus. So we've seen this typically with larger technology-based companies. So for example, Rolls-Royce are in the business of aerospace, defense technologies. They have set up around 30 university technology centers, UTCs. So these are sponsored labs on many university campuses, predominantly in the UK. I think maybe they have 10 or more, and then they have another 10 to 20 in different countries around the world. In the next slide, I'll show you an example of one of these types of labs sponsored by Syngenta. And then what's also important in these university industry linkages, what I personally feel is very important, is personal exchange, but also student placements. How can we help our student population, the student community, to take advantage of some of these university industry linkages? Again, there's a short YouTube video here from the North Carolina State University of how they help some of their mathematics students to pursue either student placements or some exchange with industry. What we've seen in some countries is that you might have the concept of a sandwich degree. Typically, rather than a 3 years Bachelor's of Science degree, it may become a 4 years degree. So where what year 1 and 2 is spent on the university, the student then spends year 3 in industry, then comes back to complete his or her study in year 4 at the university. This KTP stands for Knowledge Transfer Partnerships, and I'll come to that in a little while. Okay. So if we look at one of those linkages mentioned in the last slide, it was these strategic partnerships where a company sponsors a laboratory on the university campus. So here in Manchester, we have had one of these types of, well, we've had a number actually, but one example of this is Syngenta, which is in the business of agri-science, okay? And it has had a long-term strategic partnership, I think for over 5 years time it funds it, and then it might fund it for another 4 or 5 years afterwards, where the University Innovation Centre is researching some sensing systems or some information communication technologies for the agriculture and farming sector to support that particular industry. So this UIC has worked in several areas, for example, RFID, energy harvesting. And what it does, it brings together, so it mobilizes funding within the School of Electrical and Electronic Engineering for them to use the time of some of their academics, as well as hire some postdocs, some PhDs to work on a research project or a number of research projects over 4 or 5 years that are of mutual interest to the university and to the lab sponsor, Syngenta. So this is a typical model associated mainly with larger companies that might be interested in setting up some of these types of centres. What I want to also highlight is that when university knowledge is internalized into a firm, let's say it's through a R&D collaboration, there is still a lot of uncertainty before we see any innovations implemented. So this depends on the complexity of the collaboration project. The more complex it is, the more technical and market uncertainties it will have. Okay, so when you start the innovation journey inside of the firm, you might have collaborated with a university and you bring in knowledge into your company, but you may still have to do some further product development and testing. You might have to see, how does this fit with your business vision? Does it fit with exploiting your strategy today in the next year, or is it more longer term? Are you looking at this particular collaboration to give you some options of exploiting this research down the line, maybe in a few years' time? Do you have to develop some prototypes? Many innovations come about through going through hundreds of prototype testing and trials. Okay, so most inventions will require some additional type of testing. Are you in a business, let's say you are in the chemicals industry, there will be regulatory approvals that you have to comply with. Okay, so does this knowledge that has come in meet regulatory industry approvals? Are there some IPR, intellectual property right issues that arise? Are you going to exploit all the IPR yourself, or is there some share with the university partner that you collaborated with? Okay, then there's a whole host of other issues on partnership of the outputs, the product, market research. Is it, if it's going to be a product, how is it going to be funded? You need funding for marketing, you need funding for manufacturing. Do you have in-house manufacturing to develop this product, or will you outsource it, etc.? What are your routes to marketing? And is there senior management commitment in order to help the funding of this particular innovation through to successful market commercialization? So the point we must take away here is that not all of the university insights that come through research collaboration will be immediately commercialized within the industry setting. Depending on the complexity, you might have to take into account a wide variety of these factors before you move that research into commercialization. Okay. I want to move on to a few policy measure examples, and these are from the UK, promoting university industry interaction with industry. One is through knowledge transfer network. So this may well be a government funding scheme that is in a particular priority area. For example, in a past foresight exercise 5 years ago, your national foresight has mentioned we need to work on materials science or on food processing. That is then likely to have some policy momentum, likely to attract some funding. So that funding could come from the finance community, it could come from government, but it also means that businesses, universities, and a number of other actors can come together and work on this knowledge transfer network consortium over a number of years. So that is another way of engaging university business linkages. Then there are more specific measures, such as PhD industry schemes. So in the UK, there is a CASE award, collaborative as a award for science and engineering students, allowing PhD students to be sponsored for their PhD, partly by government funding through a National Research Council, but also through an industry partner. So with this type of studentship, the student is dual supervised by an industry PhD supervisor, could be a senior manager, as well as the university professor. The student will spend most of the time on campus, but will spend some time in the industry firm. Denmark has a similar scheme to the UK. They call it the industrial PhD scheme. Another very successful scheme in the UK that's been running for 40 plus years, so it's been evaluated for value for money on a regular basis, is the Knowledge Transfer Partnership. So this is a particular project that helps businesses to undertake open innovation and scale up a particular project over a period of 18 months, 2 years, maybe 3 years, okay? So 18 months to 3 years. The project focuses on some step change in productivity, maybe helping them improve their market share. The business firm part funds this project, but the associate is usually an MSc or a PhD graduate. So this associate is employed as a member of staff of the university for 18 months to 3 years, but actually is based on the company premises, okay? Because the associate manages the project on the company site, jointly supervised by a senior manager at the firm, but also has the academic input from an academic professor at the partner university. So in the UK, this has been quite a successful scheme across the physical sciences, engineering sciences, computer sciences, as well as more recently in the management sciences. Okay. Then I want to highlight what I consider to be quite an attractive low investment scheme for some policymakers to perhaps consider. So in the UK and the Netherlands, we've had this innovation voucher scheme that has been running for a number of years. So these innovation vouchers are small lines of credit, typically 5,000 to 10,000 euros. So we're not talking huge sums of money, hundreds of thousands or millions of euros, relatively small sums of money to help SMEs to purchase some services from a university with a view to introducing an innovation in their business. So this may be just a short consultancy service, using the time of a university professor to engage with the firm to help them think through a particular new innovation. Okay. What this does, it acts as a catalyst sometimes for more longer term in-depth relationships to develop in the future. So for some of those SMEs, small companies who have had no experience of ever engaging with a university, this might be a first step. And then in the longer term, they may develop a more deeper partnership and relationship with that university. In terms of the administration, it's a fairly straightforward application form where the SMEs have to fill out. They have a number of research questions that they need to ask, and then they apply for that particular voucher. Okay. I'll come back to the chat. There's a few questions in the chat. I'll come back to them at the end. Please remind me to do that. Okay, so now I want to show an example from Sri Lanka, where we have a national innovation initiative around the Institute of Nanotechnology. Okay, so this institute, Slintech, was set up in 2008 as a joint venture between the Sri Lankan National Science Foundation and local industry. So there you see some of the names of the industry companies, Dialogue, Brandix. The remit was to deepen collaboration between the research institutes, universities, and business enterprises. So you might think nanotechnology is very high-tech, high scientific research. What would industry benefit from that? Well, actually, the application areas, the focus areas for Slintech is in the areas of smart agriculture, rubber, nanocomposites for high-performance tires, apparel and textile. So some of these sectors are important to a developing country like Sri Lanka, and these nanotechnology initiatives help them to perhaps focus in some of those areas for the benefit not only of their universities, maybe some of their public research centers, as well as business enterprises. So this highlights a potential for a range of university industry interactions with a national initiative. If you want to read a bit more about this initiative, there's a link there to a UNESCO science report. What I want to briefly do now in the next few minutes is to highlight a few academic studies. So as an academic in the area of science, technology, innovation, management, and policy, I am interested in looking at the university industry linkages from an academic perspective. So similarly, there have been other studies that have done that in recent years, and I want to share just a snapshot with you. So here is a recent study by Albuquerque, 2015, and they were showing that some existing university industry collaborations have historical roots that span a few decades. So these are not something that could be set up straight away. Sometimes you need a lot of time to develop these roots. In this particular book chapter, they show how South African and Brazilian universities has played a prominent role in bringing updated knowledge from some developing country partnerships that they've had, especially in the area of mining for South Africa and for creating new firms in iron and steel sector in Brazil. So this highlights an international dimension of knowledge flows from the developed world through to here you have emerging economies, BRIC economies in terms of South Africa and Brazil, facilitated through the local universities. So the universities don't just have links nationally within their countries. Some of these universities have international linkages with industry that then can help their particular economies in the future. So next few slides are some insights from data that I collected in partnership with some colleagues in a Sri Lankan university, in University of Moratuwa, and also the team at, Dr. Naeem knows them well, at PCST, Pakistan Council for Science and Technology. So without their help, I couldn't have collected some of this data. So that was a collaboration between myself and colleagues in Sri Lanka and Pakistan. So we did a short survey, questionnaire survey with a number of universities in both the countries. We held interviews. We also did some interviews with business managers, and we held a number of workshop events. What I want to point out here is that this was an exploratory study. We didn't have the budget to do a large-scale survey of all the universities of much more industry sectors. So think of this as an exploratory first step study in both of the countries. And here is a snapshot of some of the key findings that we had. What were the factors motivating university to develop collaborative links with industry in the context of these two developing countries? So some of these factors are actually confirmed in the literature in developed countries as well. Okay, so it's not just an issue for the developing country. So one factor was to access industry feedback for graduates in curriculum development for the university teams. To access state-of-the-art equipment and facilities. So some of this state-of-the-art equipment and facilities might actually exist in some firms that have high-cost R&D facilities that are willing to give access to the universities to share some of that equipment. It may be, for example, materials science research and testing equipment that the universities don't have on their campus, but they can perhaps collaborate with through the firms. Tends to be more with larger firms. For the universities, another factor was to find an exploitation outlet. So many universities have lots of research outlets, research capabilities that go into patents, into publications, but they may not realize their potential for some length of time. So this realization of the potential could come through exploitation of that research with some industry partners. And also the key findings was to train students in an industrial environment. So what we find is that many of our curriculums are becoming outdated, what I would call typically textbook curriculums that need to be reinvigorated. Okay, so how will you reinvigorate that? By allowing your students to train especially those in the areas of the science, the technologies, the engineering that need to have that industry relevant training. So is there any opportunities for students to take advantage of placements, of projects, of some other form of interaction with the industry partners? Continue with the findings. As you can expect, we came across a number of barriers to establishing collaborative links with industry from the university side. So sometimes these are insufficient experience. Not all academics working in universities have prior experience of collaborating with industry. They may not have any experience of new product development or commercialization. So this is a barrier for them to think about how some of their ideas can be commercialized. Perhaps they cannot respond to industry needs as equipments and facilities inside of the university research centres are outdated or insufficient. This is a key barrier, is the difference in objectives of the university and the company. Yeah. Often the companies will have different business objectives. The universities will have different educational objectives, and it may not be able to bring them together. Work required by industry might not be of interest for some university researchers. Some of the university researchers may be more interested in basic research rather than applied research, which is fair enough. Okay. And what's interesting is also the lack of rewards for academics to work with industry. Is this going to be recognized in my professional line of work? My teaching will be recognized maybe through student feedback. My research outputs will be recognized through publications, through peer review, through patents, etc. But collaboration with industry, is that recognized in my university system? Not the case in many of the universities that we interacted with in Sri Lanka and Pakistan. Interestingly, we had a number of workshops, one of those with a focus group in Sri Lanka. And what they were saying is that the universities themselves should develop a culture to recognize the value of business engagement. They want universities to be more proactive in very simple things, offering knowledge transfer seminars to business and industry. What are you actually working on within the closed walls of your university? They want to learn more about that through some dissemination of seminars. Okay, and that could help develop collaborative opportunities in the future. One of the problems for the Sri Lankan focus group was the bureaucratic system that prevails in their universities. It hinders collaboration. There is too much bureaucracy in setting up a very simple collaboration project between a Sri Lankan university and an industry partner. Okay. What they offered in terms of suggestions was perhaps to create a national institute that perhaps acts as an industry academia coordination body. So is there a role for an intermediary organization in a small country like Sri Lanka, or in larger countries in Pakistan, perhaps within the provinces, or more so within the big cities? Can there be some sort of a national institute that helps to coordinate some of these linkages? Okay. So we move on to what might be realistic for university industry interaction promotion, especially in developing countries, which is one of my research interests. There are a variety of mechanisms, as I've highlighted before, but sometimes it's the simple steps that work, and they are promoting informal networking where university staff and industry staff can come together, and why not meet at more conferences and industry forums. Many of the conferences that the academics attend may not be attended by industry at all. They may be just purely scientific dissemination events. So should we be thinking of looking at the types of conferences and forums that might be applicable to send our academics to send our industry staff to? What's very important is student projects, giving students access to facilities and expertise. This is a fairly low cost, low level activity that many universities can pursue. They may introduce the concept of the sandwich degree, where you have an industry placement year. For that, obviously, you need somebody, either one person or a team in the university, to help facilitate these industry placements for your students. Of course, if you have large student programs, then it may well be that it's only a cohort of those students that could take advantage of the placements. So perhaps those that are interested in having a 4 or 5 year degree program rather than a 3-year program. And then for some opportunities, there is company sponsored labs, as I've mentioned before, but the firms need to be attracted to this as a strategic option, because those labs are specifically sponsored mainly by larger firms, and it has to be part of their next 3 to 5 year strategy. It has to fit within the strategy, the business strategy of the company. Okay. I saw one example of that when I visited the University of Moratuwa, where they had an industry lab in the area of material science, where they'd set up that lab on the university campus for the staff and the students of the university to use the equipment and the facilities of the laboratory. An interesting example that we've looked at recently, one of my PhD students looked at this, was industry input into curriculum design. And he gathered a lot of data from India, where, as you know, the ICT, information communication technology, is very strong. And many of their universities would like to see more of an input from industry into some of their teaching and curriculum development. And an example of that we found was with IBM. So IBM has designed and delivered some external courses for on-campus degrees, for degree certification purposes. And this is in the area, for example, it might be cloud computing, big data analysis. So this is an affiliate of a university in Rajasthan, helping to create a pool of graduates with IT software skills. Not only those skills, but then they can apply those skills and they are industry ready. Now, IBM could then target graduate recruitment at some of these universities. It doesn't mean that all those graduates will want to work for IBM or they are going to be successful in working for IBM. But because they've had that input into their curriculum, it gives them a wider skill set. They can highlight this on their CV when they are applying for jobs in the future. So much of the Indian ICT engineering universities have started to show a lot of interest with working with some of the large technology companies to actually have an input into the design of the curriculum and into some of the teaching activities. So both large firms as well as SMEs can utilize university industry collaboration in many different ways. Okay, so a major motivation is to gain access to networks and build contact. This is especially important, I would say, for SME firms, okay, because networks will help them to grow their business. It will help them to build more contacts for their businesses. Large firms can utilize these collaborations through, we've seen some examples, by sanctioning some budgets for new lines of research before they then look at that particular research output inside of the company and bring it in. So it gives them this intelligence gathering lens to see who should we explore some of our collaborations with. So for some large firms, they may be doing many collaborations with different firms with a view to then utilizing those results to sanction internal resources to take that into a particular technical area in the future. As I've mentioned before, some large firms are interested in sponsoring laboratories, and I think that that provides very good access for students and staff to use some of those lab facilities. These UI collaboration consortia projects are crucial for SMEs. So by consortia, we mean SMEs, large firms, a number of research centres, university research centres coming together, working on a particular research project that helps them to understand their user and customer needs. So for some of these SMEs, they can test their new ideas with the support of a large firm within the consortia, and that large firm might be a future customer of theirs. We've seen that in the UK in the aircraft building industry. Okay, so companies like BAE System, Boeing have set up this consortia where they've invited many SMEs to join the consortia, and then the SMEs have taken advantage of that, where they have worked with the BAE or the Boeing on robotics or other areas in the future. So those large companies become their customers for some of these SMEs. So there's huge potential for some of these SMEs to utilize these consortia projects to their benefit in the future. Okay? Some SMEs also need help and mentoring from the university to grow and develop, where especially the firm is born inside of the university incubator and then later spins off into a standalone entity. So here it's important for the university to have mechanisms in place for supporting and mentoring their incubator firms to help them develop, to help them grow, and hopefully to attract external funding in the future. Okay, so we've come to the last slide, which is really just a recap, a summary slide. The challenges of facilitating interaction between universities and industry is largely about a difference in culture, a difference in organization and objectives, okay? So typically universities are large organizations with highly focused individuals where industry is organized in business teams and groupings. Yeah. So often with well-defined strategic goals. So the industry will have more defined strategic goals, whereas the university is a bit more looser in terms of its strategic goals because it has highly focused individuals working on their own lines of research. What we must appreciate here is that we can't assume that all academic professors will want to interact with firms. So this should be very important. It's a choice for the individuals. For those that wish to pursue that, they should be supported in the best way possible to pursue those linkages. How can they be supported? They can be supported by the university, but also nationally. So government can support university industry interactions through a variety of policy measures, helping to create consortia that improve national competitiveness in a key science, technology, innovation area. So I go back to the previous presentation you had this morning in the area of foresight. So has the foresight exercise led the country to think about a particular science technology area that they need to develop in the future? They need to bring together key stakeholders. So the government might prioritize that area. It might be in biotechnology. It might be in agricultural science. It might be some other area. It wants to prioritize that area, and that will help with a policy measure to bring in SMEs and large companies to work together with universities. The government can also have specific policy measures, such as those that I showed that encourage student mobility, such as the industrial PhD program in the UK, in Denmark, okay? So there could be other types of student mobility program that the government is interested in introducing to help develop some of these UI relationships. And lastly, we need many forums. This is a relatively straightforward, low-cost type of activity, but it needs to be done. Seminars and conferences to help to bring together the community of university and industry professionals. The advantage of that is that you can kickstart lots of short-term, low-cost university engagement, possibly laying the foundations for more longer-term strategic partnerships in the future. Okay. So thank you very much. I will conclude my presentation and I will stop sharing my screen. Okay.
Thank you very much, Professor Dr. Khalil. It was a wonderful presentation. We have some questions in the chat box. Let me, if you allow me, can I read them for you?
Yes, please. Yes, please. Yeah.
So first question is that we have university industry attachment programs in our university.
Yeah.
This is Miss Karen from, I think, Kenya, but I think the time allocated which is around 2 to 3 months, is too short. I think she would like your comment on it.
It depends on the nature of those short-term attachments. If the purpose, what is the purpose of those attachments? Is it just a student project, or is it with a view to take that particular project further and develop it into a more deeper relationship? So without knowing the nature of what the attachment is, I wouldn't be able to speculate, but I would say that those sort of attachments should be continued to be encouraged, but actually then it's from the university side and the industry side to decide what can we do with the outputs. Are they going to act as a platform to help us develop more deeper relationships? Okay.
Thank you very much. We have another question. So you mentioned that there is a science park adjacent to Manchester University.
Yes.
Could you please tell us about the collaboration areas between Science Park and Manchester University?
Well, this is on an ad hoc basis. It's not a formal requirement for the tenant companies on the science park to have a relationship with the university. So, for example, there may be a tenant company on the science park that is interested in developing technologies in renewable energy areas, okay? So they can then perhaps look at a collaboration either with the area of material science, maybe with the civil engineering department, perhaps with the mechanical engineering school, to pursue this renewable energy technology for the future. On a lower scale, I'm aware that within our business schools, sometimes we might be approached by a small company in the science park that wants to look at some data mining exercises, okay? And they want to have some idea which are the latest tools and techniques that we can use. And they can have a discussion with some experts in that particular field of data mining, either in the business school or in our school of informatics, computer science, okay? So there are many bilateral opportunities that the companies on the science park can pursue. But this has to be facilitated also by the science park management team. So they need to be proactive in this to help the tenant companies to take advantage, because it's not a mandate. It's not a compulsory mandate that if you're on a science park that you have to take advantage of that.
Thank you very much, Dr. Khalil. And you can see there are so many comments about your presentation. People would like to have a copy of your presentation. So if you allow me, I can share them.
Yes, of course. Yeah, I've sent you a copy, haven't I? So you can share that by all means, yeah. Thank
you very much. So here is the last question for you. What is your thoughts on frameworks like triple helix, quad helix model, especially in low and middle income countries context?
Yeah, I've purposely not mentioned that because that can then take us into more of an academic study. So I wasn't sure whether, obviously it's good to see some people are familiar with that. So basically the triple helix complex, I mentioned the role of the government within that as a key stakeholder in terms of promoting university industry collaboration through various policy measures. So within the triple helix, you have the university actor, the industry actor, but also government or some national agency that plays a prominent role. And then outside of the triple helix, what we've seen recently is wider society. The concept of do some of these interactions between university and industry have an impact on societal benefits? could the driver of those collaborations and interactions actually be societal challenges? So Mr. Rummer was giving you a nice presentation before of some future societal challenges, obesity, for example. So those could be, they could be mandated, they could become important if there is a national debate about this and society is wanting, to learn more about that particular area. And that could then feed into driving some research programs around obesity, addressing obesity challenges in the future, or any other societal challenges. So yes, in the literature, there is this triple helix model, quad helix model. It basically, though, it means the interaction of more wider variety of actors and stakeholders in this type of collaboration.
Thank you very much, Dr. Khalil. And I would request Dr. STK Naeem if she would like to say something before we move on to our next speaker.
Please, sorry.
Yeah. Khalil, thank you very much. I'm so grateful for you to have taken time out for this presentation. I hope we can engage you. This was a wonderful presentation, and I've learned a lot myself today from your presentation.
Thank you.
Yes, it was fantastic, and you've seen the interest from our viewers also. So or from our participants rather, but the problems you have identified in Pakistan and Sri Lanka. Let me tell you a few more problems that we have identified. It's also the industry in Pakistan, as you know, has been protected for a long time. They have become used to undue subsidies and monopolies, and they become monopolies, in fact. And it's because there were no strict competition laws. So that's, unless we have competition within the industry, and also, we are promoting exports through subsidies and all kind of subsidies. For example, we have given them subsidy on energy, on electricity, getting energy, gas or electricity. We've given them subsidy on that. But I think there should be a condition of them upgrading their technology. There should be a condition for them for some R&D and to become innovative. So unless we put those conditions, on and look at the demand side, this industry will not collaborate with, or they would not seek collaboration from the universities. The universities have now ORICs. These are the what are they called?
The small technology transfer centers. I think I saw
technology transfer centers. Now, they need to be evaluated also, because I think, to my knowledge, they are not working as effectively as they should. And there are reasons for it. And the reason is that they do not have the kind of skilled personnel that is needed. Yeah. Because people just, you need to have 4 different types of skills there. The management skills, somebody business management who can make a business plan for you. Then, of course, your IPR skills, people who can protect your IPR. Then there are, of course, personnel, public relation officer who can communicate between university and industry.
Can I just ask, madam, how long have these ORICs been established?
That are needed, that are not there. The other thing I wanted to say was, I think what we need also to do here is in terms of policy is, academic evaluation. When we evaluate the academics for further promotions, what we could do is add benefits to the industry or social benefits, both, or inclusive innovations. Both if the university has done something which has social values. So both of these conditions as part of the evaluation, their evaluation. And I think one of the American university has recently done it. It's not even recently, about 10 years ago. It's that university is also in North Carolina. They have put in this condition. They've said, okay, 30% for your university industry linkages. What have you done for the industry, right? And this needs to be properly, of course, judged, evaluated. So when you're here, hopefully, and when we meet, we can plan a project again. So, and hopefully, I do hope again that you will participate in our courses, because we plan to do many more on this subject.
No, you make a valuable comment, especially about the criteria, evaluation criteria for promotion of academics from, the assistant to associate to full professorship, going through. So is evaluation for, let's say, social responsibility, for industry engagement, can that be incorporated? So that's down to the management of the universities, I assume. They need to do. Or can it be mandated by HEC or some other organization?
Yes, a third organization, HEC, that it could be managed by HEC. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. It's interesting. I learned a little bit about the ORICs, but they've been established for how many years now?
I think about more than a decade, or about a decade. Yeah.
There's been not an evaluation of the ORICs.
No, there has to be some evaluation, and I think some international experts should come and evaluate them, and let the university know why they are not working. And what is the problem there, so that they try to resolve it.
Okay.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you for inviting me, and I'm going to be listening to Mr. Umar's next. You have another short presentation. I'm interested in your presentation as well, so I'll continue to engage in this.
No, Khalil, I was yesterday. I finished my presentations yesterday, but I can send you the copies.
Oh, yes, please. Yes,
yeah, I will. And I'll share them. Yes, certainly I'll share them.
Thank you very much.
As I said, I do hope you will participate again and you'll take out time. We are just doing it all free of charge, just to promote this area, because just as a service to the nation.
No, that's my pleasure.
Thanks a lot. I'm so grateful. I'm very grateful.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, madam. And again, thank you to Professor Dr. Khalil for his valuable time and wonderful presentation. Now we move on to our next speaker. Our next speaker is Professor Dr. Tim Turpin. Professor Dr. Tim Turpin is a sociologist and a specialist in science and technology policy. He is an international consultant for Australian-based consortium, Migration, Appropriate Technology, Education and Skills. He is also adjunct professorial fellow at School of Business, University of West Sydney, Australia. His research focuses on issues associated with inclusive development and local and global processes through which knowledge is produced, managed, and diffused. He has been commissioned by international agencies such as World Bank, UNESCO, ASEAN, APEC, to lead studies into national innovation systems, in institutional changes, technology and innovation policy. Professor Dr. Tim Turpin has published widely in the international literature, and selection of his work have been translated into French, Chinese, Italian, Spanish, Arabic, and Mongolian. The title of his talk today is Science, Technology, Innovation, setting and coordinating policy in a crowded house. And we are very grateful for Professor Dr. Tim Turpin for his time and for being with us. Over to you, Professor Dr. Tim Turpin.
Thank you very much, Kazima. I'm hoping that you can hear me now. And I'll have to work out just how to get into my share screen, which I will do while just saying a few words while I try to do that. And you can tell me if that is okay.
I think Kazima didn't understand.
Okay.
Yes, 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 Professor Tim, I can see you and hear you as well. You can share your slides.
Okay,
Yes.
now I've gone into share screen. I'm trying to find the right one to use. Just a moment. Okay, I think I'm getting there now. Are you seeing my shared screen now?
Yeah.
No.
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 No?
So Professor, do you want us to play it for you if you would like?
Oh, if you have it there, yes, that's fine. I can.
Yeah, we'll do it from here. Tim.
Okay. Okay. I don't know why that did not work there, but we'll go back. Okay. So will I see this? Will I be able to see the screen that you're doing from there?
Yes.
I cannot see it at the moment, though.
Take a minute, Ms. Kazima.
Yeah, coming up now.
Hang on a minute, yeah.
I'm not seeing it yet.
She's looking into it, yeah.
Professor, just give us some time. We have in the system. We're just trying to connect you.
Okay.
ये अब हो जाएगा. अब हमें मूव करनी पड़ेंगी स्लाइड्स, जैसे कल मैंने किया था उनके लिए, आपने किया था बल्कि ये. हाँ. Can you see it now?
No, I'm not.
No, we cannot see the slides.
Okay,
Yeah,
wait a minute.
It's
Yep,
just starting. Yeah.
now we are in business. Okay. So thank you. Thank you very much. And it's a pleasure to be with you, all of you, and greetings from Sydney, Australia. My purpose is in this presentation is to focus very much on the actual science policy, technology and innovation policy process and processes. And the point of that is to unravel some of the issues and complexities that are faced by policymakers and policy advisors, and also to share with the information for people engaged in the scientific process, the research process, technology development and innovation, to, I hope, have a greater idea of the complexities and the difficulties faced by policymakers. Now, do I need to tell you to move on? How will I move these slides forward? Are you hearing me?
Yes, Professor, you can just tell us and we can move the slides for you.
Dr. Tim, when you can tell me and I'll just keep moving it. So I've moved on to the next one.
Okay. And just let me say there are quite a few more slides than I will actually speak on, and I included them because I thought it would be useful for your compendium to have these extra slides. So some I will stop and spend a little time on, and others I will just go through very quickly because they are there to give you some examples of what I'm talking about. But the general outline is I want to focus on the challenges that are facing policymakers for science, technology and innovation policy. And I want to focus, draw attention to the fact that science, technology and innovation each require different sets of policies and interventions. But of course, there are many that always overlap. And this overlapping process is where I call it a very crowded house, and how we can learn from and seek to balance the policy system overall to make it more effective. Next slide, please. Okay, there was a time in science policy when we were looking very much for, it was assumed that it was a lineal approach, but more recently there's a recognition that it's a much more complex process than that, largely because science is being driven so much towards innovation and economic development. And this brings up a lot of challenges for the policymakers, and it brings up a lot of challenges for science and scientists. Next slide, please. So the implications of these changes are that from an innovation systems perspective, there are many, many more agencies and institutions and individuals that have a direct interest and or are affected by the introduction of various policies. So there are winners and losers in decisions made by governments who intervene in the process. Next slide. Some of these slides, I just have additional text on them. Yes, thank you. There's a need to consider policy initiatives for each area of action, that is for the science and scientists, for technology and technologists and engineers, and for the overall creative innovation process. But there's also a very strong need to balance the focus and the intent and understand the impact that these different instruments might have on each area of activity. Move on, please. Next slide.
For some reason,
Okay. It's important to remember that almost every country has a different context, that the social, economic, political situation in each country is very different, and it's not possible to simply apply what's been effective in one nation into another. But there are many lessons that can be learned from the international experiences, and the important thing is to learn from these in the context of the local policy. There are many reasons, of course, for supporting science other than for the direct contribution to economic development and innovation. And it's that tension between science for new knowledge and science for economic development. Next slide. Okay, so there are a number of important issues for science and technology policymakers. Firstly, they need to understand the nature of the national system, the amount of institutions and the agencies and the linkages between those agencies. And we had a very good talk from the last speaker about the significance of these linkages, and recognizing the broad contributions of science to society, as well as contributions to the other segments, and establishing good government mechanisms and the processes to be able to monitor and learn from the processes and experiences that is emerging from the introduction of policies. They should be continually tinkered with and considered and adjusted. It's an evolving process. Next slide. So just to step back for a moment and think about it, I want to take us into the position of policymakers generally. And the general definition of policy, and I'm talking about public policy here, of course, is courses of action may be taken by government. The regulatory measures, the laws, priorities on a particular topic, promulgated by a government entity or its representatives. So this is where I want to start from, taking us back to what is policy. Next slide, please. Okay, it's important to think of any policy. There are three key elements when we want to think about policy and evaluate policy and implement policy. First of all, definition of the problem. It's the rationale, why we're doing something, why something needs to be changed. Then there's a need to identify the goals to be achieved, the objectives, the targets. And thirdly, there's the instruments of action that are available and can sensibly be undertaken to achieve those goals and ameliorate the problem, the tools and the mechanisms available. Next slide. So let's just think about science, the scientific sphere of action. What are some of the rationale? What are some of the things that needed to be changed? And these are some examples. We want to build a body of scholars and practitioners. It has many implications for training and careers and employment. There's a need to draw on global knowledge networks. No nation is capable of simply producing all of the scientific knowledge, but it's important to have the capacity to draw on global knowledge, and that requires a scientific network. There's a need for resources for scientific research, equipment, capital goods. There's a need for generating public awareness of the social values of scientific knowledge and promoting scientific research across both public and private sectors. I'll talk a little bit more about the social values of scientific knowledge in a little while. Next slide. Just a look for very briefly at the global context. It's useful to do this, I think, because we can think about our own nation and the area that we're responsible for in terms of policy, to think about what's the global context and how different or similar is our focus from global context. Well, between 2014 and 2018, for example, the global research pool grew 3 times faster than the global population. So science is growing. And this translated into nearly 9 million full-time equivalent researchers. That's a lot of scientists or researchers working around the world. And that grew from 7.8 million in 2014. So 9 million, 7.8 to 9 million, and another, that's only 2018 and we're in 2021 by now. Researcher density has expanded by at least 20% over this period. Next slide, please. So in growing, research spending has risen by nearly 20%, outpacing the growth of the global economy, which is up 14%. That's it. And the output is growing. There's been a general trend towards more intense scientific publication, with publications 20% higher than in 2015. Next slide. The overall global focus, countries around the world are prioritizing their transition to digital and green economies in parallel. Most economies, in terms of investments in science, are thinking strongly about digital and green economies. And international collaboration is very much on the rise. And COVID-19, which has introduced what some of you may know as the Black Swan event. The Black Swan event was a metaphor that was developed in finance and economics from the early Roman times. All swans were white, and this was a known fact. But in the early 1700s, a Dutch expedition to the Great Southland that became Australia found black swans, and they brought a pair of black swans back to Europe. A great consternation. So that has become a metaphor for a very rare event that cannot be predicted and that has huge implications. Next slide. So there is the black swan. And COVID-19, I think, is a very good example of a classical black swan event. It's not predicted, and it's has a huge impact on the society in many different ways, and on the science and technology as well. So next slide. So in the context of something like this pandemic, and COVID-19, of course, is not the only thing that has had a great global interest on science, but it is a very contemporary one, and it has been very marked. Scientists have considerable interest with policymakers, and policymakers have considerable interest in science. Policymakers have considerable interest in industrialists and trying to generate economic development. And in recent decades, there has been more and more collaboration and interest from the general community in scientists. If we think of climate change issues and debates, science is seen as an important place for assessments of what the scientific situation can say about given events, climate change, for example. In COVID-19, its science was turned to very directly for why has this happened? How can we deal with it? How can we control it? And what are the best policy interventions that can be made to manage this pandemic? And one more click of the slide, please. Science and communication is in the heart, becomes in the heart of these sorts of issues. I don't know about Pakistan, but in our country, there have been huge debates about managing COVID-19, lockdowns, and these sorts of things, vaccination. And science is seen as an arbiter, but it's created all sorts of conflicts between businesses on one hand, fare very badly during lockdowns. The health system fares very badly during open slather. So there are conflicts, and policymakers have to make decisions. They can rely on scientific advice and the advice of scientists, but ultimately the policymakers are the interveners between various sectors of the community to make a decision and weighing up the advice from science on the one hand, economists on the other, health practitioners on the other, and so on. So it's becomes a very complex area, making general policy decisions, and it becomes complex in terms of making decisions directly related to science. So policymakers are often intervening between scientific advice and the general community. Next slide, please. So let's thinking about some of the objectives for science. It's important to build a human resource base. Now, these are just some examples. You can think about others at a later stage. You can think about promoting targeted national R&D efforts, providing general advice to other policy sectors, agriculture, health, etc. Promoting institutional links and networks between different institutions and sectors so that science can work effectively across private and public sectors. Balancing local and global priorities. Global issues associated with issues such as climate change, global pandemics affect everyone, but there are particular local issues that are different in different countries and different contexts. Setting timeframes and maintaining a system through monitoring, evaluation, and continual feedback. Next slide, please. So bringing science to bear on society and the economy, generating knowledge, capturing knowledge, and using knowledge is critically important. More interest groups are engaged with the process. If we look at a systems perspective, there is more administrative agencies involved. There's more collaboration and competitiveness. And there's a deepening of science and the technological human capital. There are firms and productive units, and introducing government incentives and managing these becomes all the more complex with whatever program is introduced. It affects different segments of the network and the system in different ways. And I want to stress as we go on further that it's important to understand the implications in other areas so that other tweaking can occur around the policy. Next slide, please. So thinking about the policy tools and mechanisms, what can be used, how things can be used, what are the mechanisms at hand for policymakers and governments? Well, in the public sector, for example, there are budget allocations, there are educational decisions, there's emphasis on international linkages, there are tools that can be introduced to allow for career options to progress effectively for scientists, and there are priority investments for thematic areas, and importantly, cross-sector collaboration. So that's a little group of tools and mechanisms that are typically available for the public sector. And then, of course, for the private sector, there's a different set of tools. There are taxation incentives, there are cross-sector collaborative initiatives, projects and career issues for scientists, issues associated with technologists, designers, tool makers, all involved in the innovation technology side, and higher education and skills development. Private sector continually seeking the needs of skills and employment. Next slide, please. So just hold it there for a moment. That's nice. So if you think of science and society, typically from a purely scientific perspective and public science, there's a focus on science policy for the whys, the hows, and the what shall we do, deal with issues, food security, health, public institutions, production of knowledge, biodiversity, environment, disaster mitigation, and there are many others, but this is an example of what science policy can be steering scientific work and research toward. But also, equally, there is the contributions that science can make towards technology, innovation, and development. And here we have markets, firms, finance systems, capital goods, and so on. There are a different set of instruments needed to promote activities in that area. One more click, please. Okay, so this is an arbitrary line that just to indicate policymakers have to think about these two elements. To what extent is the emphasis going to be made on directing science in these areas? And to what extent is it going to be directing science in the technology, innovation, and economic development area? It's not to say one is more important than the other, but it's to be aware of which direction they're going. One more click, please. Often science is just, oops, that's it, just there for a moment, that if the focus for policy is on science, and there are many good reasons for just contributing to science and building basic knowledge embedded in the system, it's focusing on these areas. But the policymakers have to look at the whole picture, which would be one click back. So be aware of both sides. Yes, that's policymakers need to be aware of the many good reasons for seeking to contribute in both sides. And it's important to think about and reflect on where the policy initiatives, where the interventions, where the extra funding is going, to which side of that dotted line. A balance is essential. Next, please. And again, so let's turn now to the technology development side, that underside there. It involves a very diverse range of organizations compared to those on the northern side, as it were. It involves a different variety of personnel skills and experiences, designers, creators, technicians, welders, all sorts of people. It involves different sources of funding, not just public funding. It involves different ways of making use of knowledge and different ways of wanting to control knowledge. And there are different drivers. There are different imperatives for time, cost, and expectations of return. So these are different from the pure science side. Next slide, please. So this, I'll just gloss over this. We probably all know about innovation being seen as the frontier of competitiveness. And it's the defining challenge for competitiveness is a well-functioning national innovation system. It calls for enhanced science, enhanced technology, and an innovation infrastructure. The next slide, please. So some of the challenges that are taking an innovation systems perspective. Building the national human base for science and technology involves a wide range of people and a different set of skills from the pure science side. Certainly involves science, but it involves many others, including financiers and marketers. Supporting a targeted national R&D effort. It's a challenge for national policy to support a national R&D effort across the public and the private sector. And these require a different sets of activities, different sets of investments. Promoting institutional links and networks between the institutions and the sectors and across other parts of the world. It requires promoting market-driven linkages, not just those that might be driven from the public sector. And again, maintaining a national system requires regular monitoring and evaluation. Next, please. Okay, there are a number of areas where these sorts of strategies can make a difference. A dual policy system, that is, building both public and private capabilities, can make a big difference for national development. Building innovation capabilities in firms can make a big difference. What different ways of trying to promote market-driven innovation rather than simply science-driven innovation can make a very big difference. And this requires institutional support and structures and incentives are required to make the difference. And again, indicators for the policy analysis are important for ongoing assessment of what difference is it making? What are we doing right? What are we doing wrong? Where do we need to make some changes? These are the sort of questions that behind the minds of policymakers all the time. Next, please. It requires a particular policy mindset to focus on a national innovation system. It's recognizing that firms aren't only users, but they also generate knowledge. They are, in many ways, are at the center of the system. And it's not only firms, it's also for other productive sectors, the agricultural sector. They're producers, and they too provide useful knowledge, and they're generators of new knowledge. They can learn from the process, and policymakers can learn from the process that firms and producers are experiencing. Particular policy mindset needs to take advantage of multinational corporations and enhance the impact that foreign investors can have in attracting foreign direct investment. They're part of the process. They're not the only part of the process, but they are an important part of the process. So there are ways that multinational corporations can be utilized in terms of providing training for the local producers and contributors. And it's important in this policy mindset to be able to distinguish between what can be considered as welfare and competitiveness in designing the policy instruments. Encouraging good firms to do good things better is important. Next slide, please. So why is this sort of mindset useful for policymakers? Well, it draws attention to the different organizations in the system to recognize that the many different institutions and organizations within the system are operating in different ways. They have different ways of contributing to the policy process. They have different ways of building on knowledge and drawing on knowledge. The approach draws attention to the linkages within the system. That it is not just what takes place in the different organizations, their outputs and inputs, but the linkages between the organizations and the institutions. So a focus on linkages is very important in terms of overall policies that are going to build links between science, technology, and innovation. And it draws attention to the strengths and weaknesses in the above. In the particular local context, it draws attention to the strengths and the weaknesses of different organizations. In some countries, there is a very weak private sector, and there may be ways to strengthen that private sector. It draws attention to the linkages that the private sector, small firms, may be able to work more effectively with the larger firms and learn from the larger firms. And it allows for a sharper definition of policy targets, the objectives and the outcomes of each activity. Next slide, please. So considering the policy instruments, it's useful to think of the policy objectives, the mechanisms for achieving those objectives, the monitoring and learning from the process, and tinkering and adjusting the system. So policymakers are continually focused with paying attention and considering the objectives, the mechanisms, the learning from the process, and adjusting the process. Next, please. Okay, now just here, I'll just quickly run through these because I want to show some ways that instruments can be assessed in terms of what activities can, what tools, what mechanisms are generally used. So let's quickly run through these. On the one hand, we can focus on generic public sector R&D policies. Most people understand these very clearly. There can be discretionary institutional funding for research and development, competitive R&D projects, infrastructure projects, centers of excellence, cross-sectoral collaboration and structural reform. Then there are a set of instruments that can be focused on generic private sector R&D policy, discretionary research funding, competitive R&D project grants, R&D procurement, purchasing by the public sector. So these can be added to, but it's a classification of these instruments that I just want to draw attention to here. Next slide. There can be a focus on instruments on thematic sectoral policy, support schemes for high-tech sectors, for example, support team for specific social issues, COVID-19, for example, climate change, for example. Then there can be a set of policy initiative focused on strengthening linkages. And examples here are collaboratively, broadly based R&D programs, clusters and regional growth poles, science parks, support for university industry linkages, and technology platforms for action. Next slide, please. And then the third one here, a number of activities associated with intellectual property rights, reform of IPR regulation, support schemes to help secure property rights which costs money and costs time. Small businesses, for example, have a lot of difficulty making good use of intellectual property rights. And then there are financial, fiscal policy issues, risk capital, loan guarantees, R&D tax relief measures. And then there's human resource policies, efforts to make science, technology, and engineering more attractive for students, subsidies for hiring S&T personnel, tax incentives for S&T personnel, immigration policies for science, technology, and innovation and engineering personnel. Next slide, please. This is an example I like to show sometimes because this is where it becomes a very messy system. This slide is an example in Australia of the sugar industry funding. And I don't expect anyone to look too closely at the numbers there, but in the sugar industry, growers are levied by government, and that levy is added to research and development. And then there's institutional decisions are made about how those funds will be spent. And this is an example of the flow of money through those various processes. There are government sectors, there are state government sectors, there are local government areas, there are cooperative research centres, there are universities, public research institutes, other research institutes, there are sugar retailers and millers, there are growers, and there are many private sectors involved. And this becomes a very crowded and a messy business for policymakers to look at and understand clearly about what impact any particular incentive is bringing about. So we need some sort of processes, some mechanisms for understanding and drawing attention to how we might focus on these. Next slide, please. So trying to make sense of the innovation centre. Some of the factors that need to be considered are, what is the technology purpose? Is it focused on diffusing the technology, or is it exclusionary technology? Intellectual property rights, for example, is focused on exclusion, giving people the rights to make exclusive use of their scientific invention. And broad-based technology diffusion centres are focused on trying to promote technology being taken up more broadly. There's a science or market orientation. Are the incentives focused on promoting science specifically, or are they focused on trying to encourage the market to have an impact on innovation? What are the types of knowledge that are being promoted under various incentives? Is it focused on tacit knowledge, a sort of a knowledge base that is learned by doing and practicing? Or is it a codified knowledge base, a highly regulated, identified, codified in patents or regulations? Is it focused on domestic development or local orientation? Market or local, international or local. Next slide, please. So if we take these issues and try to separate them down, this is a sort of a mechanism for trying to look for where there are gaps, where are different policy mechanisms having an effect. So here's an example of policy initiatives focused on technology purpose, exclusion or diffusion, or science or market. And within each box there is a list of some incentives that can be typically in place in many countries, in many parts of the world. They're not always appropriate for every place, but they're examples. Next, please. So here's an examples of codified or tacit knowledge. There can be codified knowledge as government purchasing agreements. They're focused very much on the domestic side, or technology purchase agreements focused on international trade, external, foreign investment, for example. And then in these other quadrants, we have domestic tacit knowledge incentives, when here we have internationally focused tacit knowledge or codified knowledge. This is an example that people can look at later and think about using this as a mechanism, a tool for a diagnostic tool. Next slide, please. This is just a third one showing, in this case, it's an example of technology purpose, whether it's focused on exclusion and diffusion or codified or tacit knowledge. The tacit knowledge deals with skills training, foreign investment, staff exchanges, for example, whereas the codified is much more focused on purchasing foreign technologies or technology licensing. So these are examples of a diagnostic tool that can be used for trying to tease out the implications of these incentives. Next slide, please. So if we look at this little diagram here, on the one hand, yep, we can see that you can look at the incentives, you can locate from a list of public policy incentives where they might be located in terms of public sector, high or low technology. In this particular case, we have on one axis low or high technology, and on the other axis, whether they're focused on public sector institutions or more towards private sector firms. And then we see an area here where there's a gap. Now, there may be a good reason why there's a gap there, but it's useful to be able to say, well, this is where our focus is here, and this is where our focus is over here. Do we need something in here? Do we need a focus on private sector firms in the low technology area? Perhaps not. The high technology is usually focused much more on the private sector firms. In some cases, they may be focused on public sector firms, and there may be a good argument for wanting to shift that. But it's a mechanism for trying to look more critically at the investments that are being made by government at any particular time, and to try to explore where there are gaps and whether there should be gaps there or whether there should not. Next slide, please. Okay, so as an example here, if for example, we're wanting to shift from an older emphasis that's providing capacities for firms, providing loans in firms, and an emphasis on large firms and a range of schemes or a general model for institutions, you can see that it may be possible, it may be necessary to think of shifting from one policy focus to another policy focus. And this is just an example of a shift in policy from an incentives for generating a higher firm-based competitiveness and shifting away from the public sector competitiveness, and shifting away from providing science and technology support for firms to encourage an emphasis of building a capacity in the firms and direct investment in firms and targeting categories of firms. Now, look, there are many other ways that you can think of the need to shift from one policy mindset to the next. And this is just one example. But using those sort of diagnostic tools, it's important to be able to then think about what are going to be the implications of moving from the old system or the present system to a new system. Who is going to miss out? What are the changes going to be? What are the personnel changes? What are the political issues that are going to have to be dealt with? These are all parts of what needs to be taken in place for the analysis of policy implications. Next slide, please. So I keep wanting to emphasize, and I don't think I can emphasize enough the importance of a system of indicators, thinking about what data are required to be able to understand and analyze the tools that are being used and the impact of tools, what data are required, what institution or institutions are going to be able to collect the data, and how often should it be collected? What are the appropriate benchmarks to take in terms of analyzing and assessing, evaluating the impact of policy? What is the availability of data and analysis? Who will use the data? Is this going to be used for wider circulation, or is it just going to be used by government? These are important questions. And who should be the responsible agency for collecting the data? Next slide, please. The importance of the data is that there needs to be a reliable way of measuring progress, leading indicators, given an indication of where the future is likely to be, in terms of if there is an increase in investment in R&D incentives, what's going to likely be the impact? Where is what is the expectation? Is there going to be a higher increase in research and development as a percentage of GDP? And then what are the lagging indicators? These are quite important because they provide a measure of past performance. And these are usually much more qualitative indicators. And they're needed to say, well, what has changed? And it often needs thematic or sectoral analysis for those sorts of comparisons. Next slide, please. So coming towards a conclusion now, we're looking at balancing instruments that are intended for public policy to bring about change, to bring about some change, some advancement in science and society and technology. But the relationship between science, society, and politics is a very crowded house. There are many people, organizations with imperatives, and there's a lot of shouting and noise going on metaphorically in the policy process. There is much lobbying, and policy making in this area is very much a process of choosing options that affect different stakeholders in different ways. And I'll just give an example from the Australian context, where science on a regular basis provides daily advice on the current status of COVID-19 infections, hospitalizations, intensive care, etc. Public health officials give advice to government to make decisions, and they rely on the scientific advice to underpin those decisions, but they don't necessarily offer the policy changes that are being advanced by the scientists, because there are many different factors to take into account. On the one hand, there are hospitals to think of. Can the hospitals cope with increased numbers? There's the economic, social benefit and health and well-being of society generally under lockdowns. So there are many different factors to take into account. And it's much the same in every single process of science, technology, and innovation policy, that there are different stakeholders. They're affected in different ways, and they have different opinions. Fortunately, for most policymakers, they don't have to worry so much about these. It's the actual decision makers, the government, that is going to make the decisions. They have to weigh up the stakes. But it's important for the policymakers to be able to provide advice and indicate the potential impact of any changes. So it's important to consider the role of the public sector science for its unique contribution to society and sustainable development, but it's also important to seek to build innovation capability in the firm side of the scales, as well as the public sector. Next slide, and this is almost the end. So managing the balance. I just want to focus on this one here. We talk of science, technology, and innovation policy, and inclusive development. Science, technology, innovation policy. In each of these spheres of activity, there are many actors undertaking their work, and they're intersecting areas. There is science for the benefit of pure basic science, production of knowledge, and there are many good reasons for promoting science to produce a large number of scientifically literate and active people in society, and to provide information about the role of science in society. But science can also contribute to technology and plays a very important part in understanding how technology works and why it works in the way it does and why it doesn't work sometimes, and the innovation policy. But where there's intersections across those areas, that science policy can affect technology policy, can have implications for technology policy, and it can have implications for innovation policy. And in that central area, if you can, one more click to the slide, please. In that central area is the area that I call the very crowded house, where there is a lot of noise. There are a lot of different stakeholders at work there. It's important to think of those stakeholders in terms of that central area, but not to forget the important areas on the periphery, the pure science policy, the pure technology policy, and the pure innovation policy. And to seeking ways to balance that requires some thoughtful diagnostics and some thoughtful data collections. So then that is my conclusion. Thank you very much. One more click. Balancing the scales. Thank you.
That's excellent. Yeah, excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Dr. Tim. It was a very comprehensive and excellent presentation through and through. With this, we are open for the question and answers. I would request our participants to please post questions for Professor Dr. Tim, as well as our other speakers who are also with us, so that we can take questions. So yeah, so we have 2 questions from the same person. Professor Tim, can I read it for you?
Yes. Thank
So
you.
why COVID-19 vaccine developed by different countries is not acceptable by other countries? If science and society is a human public institution, why would be the implication of such a divide on the credibility of scientists and policymakers? So yeah, it's a fully loaded question. So I'll read the rest of it as well. Does that mean that whatever is the level of maturity of STI mechanism, it would remain barred by a political interest?
I'm not sure if I'm understanding this question correctly, but let me answer it in the way that I think it is being directed. That yes, science policy in every country is a product of government decisions. So, and of course, we have different styles of governments in different countries. So the way that policy is used and collected and decision-making will depend on the different contexts, the different social, political contexts. It is different. And that is why I say it's important not to just look at one country and say, oh, this is working well for this country, it'll probably work well for us too. It may, but it may not. And I think it's important to take into the, look at the local context. What is the policy process and how are assessments made in my country, and is this a useful mechanism to introduce into my country? But it's ultimately there are political decisions that are made. I'm not sure if I'm getting to the crux of the question or not, but that was my understanding.
Yes, that's exactly probably what the participant wanted to ask. And with this, I would request Dr. ST Kinaim if she would like to say some words for you and for your presentation.
No, thank you very much, Tim. That was great, great, and I think well, I certainly understand it better than before from your lecture. So the question that this person posed was, why is COVID-19 vaccine not accepted, made by different countries, is not accepted by such country. It's, for example, the travel. If you travel to England these days, they are not accepting the vaccine that is being given to the Pakistanis, most Pakistanis, that is the Chinese vaccine, Sinopharm. Although it was approved by WHO, but the British government is asking that all travelers get the British vaccine or the American vaccine. Okay. So that's why he says the politics in this. So, yeah. And the second question was about, I think, just one second, I think it's about if the science and society is a human public institution, what would be the implication of such divide on the credibility of scientists and policymakers? Now, this is even I am not able to get this question very well. If the science and society is a human public institution, okay, what would be the implication of such divide? Okay, divide, probably he's meaning the same divide, the divide between countries in terms of not accepting. This is a political divide. It's basically, let's say it's a political question rather than a scientific question, yeah. Right? So I don't think,
I have a question.
Yeah.
Tim, I have a question for you. We're now in the process of making a STI policy for Pakistan. And I was just wondering, in your experience working with different organizations and countries, is the creation of an innovation policy by a Ministry of Science and Technology, is that a good idea, especially in the developing world? Do you think it would be better if it's done by a Ministry of Industry? Just my thoughts. All right. Can you hear my question, Tim?
Yes, I can. Yes, I think it's a very good question, and it's a question that is not easily answered. And I think the answer is it depends. In some countries, the innovation is within an industry portfolio, and there are many good reasons why that should be so. But I think, from my experience, it's important. If you're creating an innovative society, then what innovation needs to be across many areas: health, agriculture, aquaculture, many areas. And it's probably, in that case, it's probably better in a science ministry where science is considered contributing to all areas. But it really does, I think, depend on the structure of the particular system, the national system. And that's why I say a national innovation systems perspective is useful to try to better make this decision. I think many countries have explored different options for trying to deal with innovation separately. And it is such an overarching process that it is very difficult to come to some arrangement for where it should be and how it should be managed within the government portfolio.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. That's a great answer. And just one more question. I'm really sorry. And I can take other questions as well. You talked about COVID-19 and, its implications and the tussles between scientists and politicians. Eventually, somebody has to make a decision. I was just wondering if the future of STI is also related to activism. Do we need to be more activists to get our message across? Because many politicians made some really bad decisions, which resulted in a lot of loss and which resulted in a lot of life. So do you think there's going to be a larger role of activism for practitioners? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that. Just before I do answer that, I was very interested to hear Dr. Naim's comment about the COVID-19 vaccination not being accepted, the Chinese version not being accepted for people moving into the UK, because in the Australian context, we had a bad decision made. Our Australian government decided to go with the AstraZeneca vaccine because it could be very rapidly produced in Australia. So this was a political decision with obvious political implications. So it was focused, it turned out to be a bad decision because there some concerns associated with the AstraZeneca meant that people were very slow to uptake and accept the vaccinations. And meanwhile, the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines were not available in the quantities that were required. So, sorry, that was just a comment. But to go back to your question about bad decisions, I think there will be more activism, and I think it's not just COVID, but this is COVID. This black swan has introduced more activism, and the problem with activism is often whether it's based on useful and scientific knowledge or sensible economic knowledge. The important thing is that there will be more community involvement in these sorts of decisions. But I think it makes it all the more important for science to be able to communicate it more effectively by government, because we want activism can be a good thing, but it can be a disruptive factor if it's based on inadequate knowledge. So it raises the question of how can science be more effectively communicated into society so that the activism and the noise from activists can be more productive.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Really appreciate it. And nice to hear you again.
Thank you so much, Tim, again. And I hope the ministry officials were listening to your lecture. They had requested for us yesterday that if they could join in. I hope they joined in. I hope the PCST, this is the organization involved in STI research. I hope the officials from PCST had also joined in. I had asked them to do so, to particularly listen to your lecture, which is very, very relevant to their policy making process. They have to first look at the innovation system, diagnose your innovation system, and find out where it's lacking capabilities, where it's lacking competence, and where it's lacking institutional absence or institutional weakness. So all that needs to be done before you go about making a policy. Thank you so much, because you taught me, I just learned from you that it has to be done. Yes, to first go and diagnose it. Diagnose the problem first, and then identify where you want to get to. Thank you so much, Tim. And I hope you're feeling better. I hope you're good. Your lecture was extremely good. We all enjoyed it very much. Particularly, I got every bit of it. Every bit of it. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Professor Dr. Tim. And again, you can see so many comments about your excellent presentation. And with this, I would also like to add one of the comments from our speaker, Dr. Khalil Malik. He's probably referring to the question that Mr. Umar asked. Across in ministry high-level committee could perhaps help a Ministry of Science and Technology to design new STI policies in the future. This might work in some country context, as STI seems to span across most ministries. Yeah. So, Dr. Khalil, if you are with us, you can, chat with us through your video link, if you would like to expand on this, on your comment.
Yeah, it was just a thought, Tim, that whether you've come across this in any country context where a cross-ministerial team has been set up to have an input into the design of science, technology, innovation policy. To me, it seems an area that's of importance across many ministries. For example, even a finance ministry needs to be thinking about this in the context of funding future research programs. So it was just a thought. Perhaps this has worked in some country contexts in the past or not.
Yes, I think that's very true, and I think in some countries it has the potential to work more effectively than others, but it also brings in its own nature of competitiveness. You mentioned the finance, and in our country we have these cross-cutting ministerial committees, and Treasury always has their particular view because they have their Treasury issues to have to deal with, and they have to be concerned with balancing budgets, and the policy, science, technology, innovation people are interested in different sorts of balances. But it can work very effectively, and it's an important process if it does work.
Yes.
Thank you, Dr. Khalil.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think there is one question that I would like Professor Dr. Tim to answer as well. What are your thoughts on the frameworks like triple helix, quad helix model, especially in the low and the middle income countries context?
Sorry, can you just run that past me again, please?
Yes. What are your thoughts on frameworks like triple helix, quad helix model, especially in the low and the middle income countries?
My feeling in the lower middle income countries, I'm thinking of some countries that I've had some quite a bit of dealing with, countries like Mozambique and Mongolia. I think the important thing for these countries is to try to focus more effectively on key issues and themes, so develop a thematic approach. It's impossible for a low-income country, for example, to build a strong scientific capability in every area. So and there are many cases where small low-income countries have tried to spread their scientific expertise across a number of areas. I think it's more important to try to build a scientific capacity to undertake research development in very specialized thematic areas. I don't mean specialized, I mean selected thematic areas, and also to be able to interact globally for other areas where they don't have a strong scientific capability. So I think it's important to focus on those sorts of models, triple helix sort of models, taking into account the capacity to emphasize those areas where it is really going to make a difference.
Thank you very much, Professor Dr. Tim. And on behalf of Comstech, I would like to thank our speakers and the resource persons for their valuable time and for excellent presentation and very interactive ones, I must say. With this, I would request His Excellency, Professor Dr. Iqbal Chaudhry, for his closing remarks for the event.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. Good morning and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Professor Dr. Tim Turpin, Professor Dr. STI Naeem, other colleagues, participants, I'm absolutely delighted that Comstech was able to put together an event of absolute meaning and significance. And this was only possible because of the efforts, expertise, insight, and vision of Dr. STI Naeem, our colleague at Comstech, and we're very proud of her contribution. So I'm so delighted that this event took place. She has organized many such events in the past also, and we hope that in a post-COVID world where mobility would be easier, we'll be happy to welcome many great friends, including Professor Tim Turpin, to Pakistan, and and to work together with our partners in OIC countries. Ladies and gentlemen, we all know that Comstech is an organization working with OIC, and OIC is the second largest political group in terms of number of countries, 57 countries after the United Nations. Our responsibility is more apolitical. We work in the field of science and technology cooperation, which has no religion, no nationality, and no national boundaries. And that makes organization extremely strong because we can work and we do work with people from all around the world. In this whole process, we have this great advantage of partnering with people with great global vision. And Professor Tim is certainly one of those people who are for everyone. You know, his vision is for everyone, and we are so proud that he thinks of humanity as one large family, and that is the essence of this entire exercise. I'm delighted that people have benefited. I was very impressed from the comments which I received from the participants. I think it is extremely specialized, very meaningful event, has benefited many people. And I think this is one of many events which we intend to organize. So what I would like to propose for near future, that we have more of such events whenever possible, physical or hybrid. We also create a network of experts in this field, so we should be able to benefit from their experiences. As I learned from Dr. STI Naeem, that this entire policy paradigm is extremely dynamic, and there are so many things happening. As science moves forward, as technology moves forward, as innovation becomes more sophisticated, policy becomes more sophisticated as well. And with this, I would like to thank all of you, to all resource persons and participants, and my organizing team in Comstech for putting together an excellent program. Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you very much, sir, and thank you for your kind words. For our participants, the recording of these lectures will be available at Comstech's YouTube channel. I have shared the link. You can access the material. I'm also available on the email if you need any of the presentation or you need to contact your resource persons for this event. You can write me and I'll definitely put word for you, inshallah. And hope to see you soon in another event organized by Comstech. And thank you very much for all our participants for their time and participation. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Dennis.
Thank you.